Chapter 29:18. It was still understandable that 0.5 was the case. Bai Weiwei climbed up his clothes and with great difficulty hooked her fingers around his collar. The black sandalwood beads seemed to have felt something. They came over and touched Weiwei Bai affectionately. However, the beads were too heavy and knocked her down. Before she fell, she quickly hugged one of the beads with both hands. The beads floated in the air. The little Weiwei Bai swayed and finally followed the beads to Ning Chen's forehead. But she couldn't touch it. If I touch his forehead, I can purify his black energy. The system said, in theory, yes. Weiwei Bai nodded and immediately took a deep breath. She held the beads and swung for a while. Then she flew out. Her hands touched the red cinnabar mark on Ning Chen's forehead. She touched it with her fingertips and burned her hand. The cinnabar caught fire and almost burned her skin. After she touched his forehead, the black energy seemed to have felt something and rushed over. Countless black energy poured out of his body. All rushed into her fingertips. Weiwei Bai suddenly felt uncomfortable and her face began to pale. The system quickly said, your purification power is limited. Let go of your hand and stop purifying. Weiwei Bai said, I want to let go, but the black energy is sticky. It stuck to her. She was small and light. She didn't even have a chance to escape. The spiritual energy of the lotus was consumed bit by bit. Weiwei Bai felt that she couldn't die like this. She immediately reached out her finger and patted his cinnabar, saying loudly, Monk, wake up. You're making me uncomfortable. Ning Chen walked in an empty city. There were rotting corpses everywhere. Vultures circled in the sky. Countless resentful spirits were crying and howling. The remnant thoughts of the Nightmare Lord turned into a terrifying black shadow. It wrapped around his body. Little bald donkey, do you think you can destroy me? I don't believe that you have no cracks in your heart. There are countless resentful spirits in this world. You think about crossing the river every day. Can you do it? The Nightmare Lord finished speaking. Under the countless corpses, water gushed out, forming a great river of dried bones. Meanwhile, withered bones had turned into a human who was desperately shouting, save me, please save me, holy monk. Ning Chen stood in the middle of the river. Below him were countless hands that were begging for help. Those fingers were like withered trees, like demonic claws. She tugged at his clothes desperately, trying to pull him over. As long as there was the slightest change in his heart, he would be lost in the world of the nightmare's remnant thoughts. Ning Chen looked down indifferently and said in an indifferent voice, dissipate properly. It's useless to hover around me like this. Although the Nightmare Lord had been destroyed by him, however, a trace of remnant thoughts remained in his heart. His Buddhist bones were too clean. That was why the darkness could be tainted. If he didn't clean it up in time, it would turn into a terrifying darkness and accumulate in his body. The incubus moved closer to his holy face and laughed strangely. You can't even save yourself. Who else can you save, you stinky bald donkey? Ning Chen looked up at the darkness in the sky. He knew that the power of the Nightmare Lord was not that great. This was actually his dark world. The dark aura that couldn't be expelled had condensed into this hell. Suddenly, he felt his feet sink. It was those fingers that were pulling at his clothes. He frowned. Just as he was about to be pulled down, a clear spiritual aura suddenly dissipated the darkness in the sky. He looked up and immediately had the strength to pull away the countless hands and leap up. Then he suddenly opened his eyes. He saw a small pink body falling from between his brows. He suddenly raised his hand and opened his palm. What fell lightly into his palm was a small flower demon. She quietly curled up in his hand. Her cute pink face revealed a painful expression. Her beautiful toes were also trembling. This was the little lotus spirit in the pool? Was she the one who purified his dark aura just now? Ning Chen pursed his thin lips and was about to move. However, he saw that in his palm, the little flower demon had turned into a slender and beautiful lotus flower. The color of the lotus flower was sickly, not as bright as usual. The lotus flower couldn't leave the water. He held the lotus flower and instantly came to the pool. Stepping on the water surface, he put her back to the place where her roots were. Seeing that she was quietly standing on the water surface again, the lotus flower bud was closed, and the leaves were listless. The youth calmly stood in place, not moving. After a long time, the favorability prompt sounded. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 3, Chapter 29:19. Wei Wei Bai stared at the 3 favorability and finally scoffed. My beauty didn't move his heart. The system immediately added the dog head to save its life. Maybe he didn't see it clearly. It could not say that the host's appearance was not good enough. Compared to her crazy and unscrupulous super awesome conquering ability, it could not be said that the host's appearance was not good enough. She was more inclined to say that her beauty moved the hearts of all conquerors, not because of her abilities. Saying that she was strong was belittling the effect of her beauty. Belittling her beauty, she would start to feel depressed again. Wei Wei Bai heard. Didn't I fall into his hands? Why didn't he see it clearly? Is this bald donkey highly myopic? The system said, you're too petite, and you're still lying on your side. Just as he was about to look, you turned back into a lotus. Wei Wei Bai said, don't you have a sticker for me to become bigger? The system said, only your lotus can become bigger. Wei Wei Bai said, then forget it. She used a leaf to touch her lotus-like face. Originally, I worked so hard to climb into the monk's meditation room, hoping to find a mirror to look at my beautiful face. In the end, I couldn't find one. I don't even know what kind of beauty I have. The system was speechless. No wonder the host ran so hard and climbed the window like Spider-Man. It was to find a mirror. Was it not for conquering the target? Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned her head and looked at the bridge on the other side of the pond with her cute petal-like face. There was an opening under the bridge, and a monk was standing on the bridge. The beautiful young man's hair was still short, and he did not shave it. He was still wearing a white monk's robe, and the black prayer beads were wrapped around his white wrist, while the rest of the prayer beads were floating in the air like living creatures. His eyes were dark and clear, and his expression was cold and holy. The little lotus fairy shook her leaf happily, tilting her body and shouting at the bridge. Monk, are you feeling better? Do you still feel uncomfortable? Do you want me to help you purify again? Ningchen looked at her indifferently and was silent for a long time. He suddenly jumped off the long bridge and raised his wide sleeves. The prayer beads floated behind him. He walked to the front of the lotus and saw that the little lotus was looking up at him. Its 2 green leaves were trying hard to stick to each other, as if it felt that it was very cute. Still a child? Ningchen looked at her indifferently for a while and said in a clear voice, the demonic Buddha sect is gathering for the exquisite feast. Come with me. The little lotus tilted her head and asked, what is the exquisite feast? And I can't leave. The young man stretched out his finger and came to the front of the flower. His delicate face was incomparably calm. You can shrink and follow me. The little lotus seemed to be puzzled for a moment before saying, I can't change into a monk. That requires strength. I don't have any strength left. There was no power left. Was he being purified? The young man's fingers paused, but he didn't retract them. He lowered his beautiful eyelashes and suddenly opened his thin lips. I'll lend it to you. The little lotus asked strangely, why did you lend it to me? Why do you want to go with me? The young man was speechless for a moment. His expression didn't change. After a while, he said calmly, because you can purify. There are too many guests at the exquisite feast. You can block off those impure breaths. I'll borrow your purifying power to help me on my way. The little lotus obediently looked up and was quiet for a moment. Suddenly, she swayed her leaves gently and touched his fingertips. The young man's fingertips didn't move and maintained the same posture. The little lotus fairy said softly, Monk, you have to protect me well. I'm still young. Chapter 29:20. The young man's skin was as white as snow and his face was calm. He lowered his eyelashes and power flowed out of his fingertips. A golden light covered the sky. The little lotus turned into a little girl and jumped into his palm. She looked up at him and asked with a smile, "Monk, am I beautiful when I turn into a human?" The young man stood up straight, and his robe was raised. He looked at her expressionlessly for a while.
His voice was calm.
"Appearances are just illusions. Don't worry too much." After he finished speaking, he summoned the prayer beads. The prayer beads floated to his feet and turned into a golden robe. He stepped on it. The robe rose into the air. The little lotus fairy sat in his palm and looked at him curiously. The young man lowered his eyes. His gaze was still as he gently closed his palms. "You're too young. Don't look outside. You'll be blown away by the wind." Wei Bai sat cross-legged in his palm and supported her chin with both hands. She smiled and said, "Monk, what's the use of Ling Long? Your ability should be able to purify most of the dark aura.
Why do you need me?"
Ning Chen lowered his head and looked at her silently for a while. Then he said, "I need to guard my heart. I'm going to do something that violates the rules." The little lotus fairy waved her hand indifferently. There was a small lotus leaf green bracelet on her wrist. "Sai, what's wrong with that? The rules are meant to be broken. You want to purify yourself by breaking the rules? You're too fragile." The young man pursed his lips and was expressionless. Finally, his calm voice had a slight fluctuation. "You're open-minded. All demons are like you. That's why they eat people and harm people. They ignore all the rules of the world and run amok. You're just one of them." The little lotus fairy immediately jumped up. "Monk, what are you talking about? When did I eat people and harm people? If I really ate people, would I be able to purify you? You ungrateful wretched monk, I saved you, and you're framing me like this?" In the distance, there were thin clouds, and a palace that seemed to come out of nowhere appeared on the peak of a mountain. Ning Chen's eyes were distant. The wind blew, and his robe floated lightly. He heard the little lotus fairy's angry question. He was silent for a while before his voice softened. "I've wronged you. You haven't started harming people yet." The little lotus sprite started to stomp her feet again. She said unhappily in a loud voice, "You bald donkey, who's harming people? Does that mean I'll definitely harm people in the future?" The young man's face was expressionless, but it wasn't the same as before. Instead, there was a hint of helplessness. "So you are this noisy." With that, he raised his hand and gently placed her on his shoulder. "Sit here and hold on to your clothes. Don't let them fall off." The Taoist robe descended, and he had already stepped onto the peak of the mountain. More than 10 servants came to welcome him. Some of them were carrying lotus flowers, some of them were carrying water basins for washing their hands, and some of them were respectfully leading the way. "Great Master Ning Chun, the banquet has begun. The exquisite sect leader is waiting for you. Your seat is still arranged in the main seat." The young man didn't react at all. He gently raised his finger, and on his fingertip that was so beautiful that it seemed to be carved from jade, golden light floated and countless flowers and plants bloomed one after another. He stepped onto the flower path, his voice cold. "I will go myself. There's no need to follow me." Although he said that there was no need, the servants in gorgeous clothes followed him. Ning Chun was indifferent, his face calm. When he walked through the door, there was an illusion array under his feet. Countless floating clouds lingered under his feet. Under the floating clouds was a transparent water surface, and countless koi fish surrounded the guests. Oh, facilitate your next reading. You can click on the Chapter 29-21. When people stepped into it, it was as if they were stepping on solid ground. The floating clouds on the surface of the water were just an illusion of the array. So the place they stepped on was still solid ground. The hall was spacious, and the illusion of beautiful scenery could be seen. There were pavilions, small bridges, flowing water, high mountains, and flying cranes. It was boundless. Not far away, 3,000 peach trees were in full bloom, and peach petals were floating in the air. In the peach forest, there were countless seats set up separately. Some people were drinking, they were Taoist guests. Some people were playing chess, they were rogue cultivators of the world. Some people were writing poems, they were emperors of the world. The exquisite banquet had been held for 10 years. Demons could come, Taoists could come, and Buddhists could come. At the banquet, the leader of the exquisite banquet was the middleman between Buddhism and demons. Demons and Buddhism had been at odds for hundreds of years, but they could coexist peacefully at this banquet. Because the leader of the exquisite banquet provided a platform for all parties to coexist. A huge array was set up at the banquet site, and no one could use its power. When the banquet started, all parties could interact and exchange. The most important thing was the auction. All the items auctioned were rare treasures in the world. Wei Bai listened to the system's detailed explanation, nodded, and asked, "I didn't use a sticker. If the stingy donkey gave me power, I could turn into a human. Does this mean that if I work hard to absorb spiritual energy, I can also turn into a demon?" At that time, she became bigger. There was not a single mirror in the entire One Yuan temple. She spent 50 life points with great difficulty, and it was all for nothing. She couldn't see what she looked like with the water, and the pond was full of spiritual energy, so it was even harder to see a clear reflection. She looked at the water every day, wanting to see what her beautiful petals looked like, whether the color was smooth, whether the appearance was delicate. She had to endure the blurred effect and imagine for herself. When she turned into such a small person, it was even harder to see clearly. The system flipped through the information and thought hard for a while before concluding. Maybe the male lead's power is special, you can accept it, so you can turn into a human. The main reason was that the host and the male lead's soul power was close to each other. Her life was all about seizing his luck. Their luck came from the same place. The male lead's power, of course, took care of her in all aspects. Furthermore, the male lead of this world was most loved by plants. His power had a nourishing effect on plants. It probably wouldn't be a problem to raise the host into a little person.
It was just a matter of time.
Wei Bai was silent for a while. In other words, as long as I continue to receive the other party's power, I can become stronger? The system replied, "That's the theory." Wei Bai sat on the monk's shoulder and turned her head to look at the side of his face. The young man's side profile was exceptionally perfect. His thin lips were bright red, and his eyelashes were long and narrow. Looking at him like this, there wasn't a single spot that wasn't good-looking. It was just that his hair was a little short. It was just a little longer than the crew cut. She moved closer to his cheek and then reached out to touch the side of his face. His skin was incomparably smooth and tender. She touched it again. Ningchen paused and narrowed his eyes. "You don't like my shoulders?" He thought she wanted to come down, so she touched him like that. The little lotus fairy shook her head, her beautiful eyes filled with joy. "I just feel that you're so handsome, and I want to touch you." Ning Chan was speechless for a moment, but his mind was still unshaken. He did not correct her behavior. Instead, he continued to walk forward. The little lotus fairy chirped, "Monk, I saw a very big demon. The one with the horns is so ugly." The download the at https://m/sashu.com// the button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 29-22. The young man's voice was low. That is the leader of the 3 lords of the demon path, called Evil Bell. Evil Spirit, could this name be any more random? The little lotus asked again. "Then why are we here?" The young man said lightly, "We can exchange things here. I was born with a Buddhist bone which is too pure. It is easy to be contaminated with filthy air, so I need to find a tool to purify myself." Wei Bai smiled and said, "Monk, I can purify you. If you make me bigger, my purifying power will be stronger." The young man's eyelashes drooped, and he pondered for a moment before saying, "If I make you bigger, your desires will also grow. Sooner or later, you will also harm the world." The little lotus fairy's face turned cold. "If you don't want to lend me your power, then don't. Why are you wasting your breath? You're not reasonable at all. Anyway, demons harm people, and I have never harmed anyone. You're delusional and want to blame me. You're so bad." The young man walked under the peach tree. The peach blossoms were shining, and the light and petals fell on the young man. He raised his calm eyes. There is no demon that doesn't harm people. This is a demon's instinct. Because your desires are greater than anyone else's, once you're given power, you will definitely use it to harm others to replenish yourself. Demons and ghosts were all like that. There was no exception. The little lotus was also a demon. Sooner or later, she would have desires. When desires were rampant, it was time to harm people. Wei Bai crossed her arms and sneered. Why don't you have desires? I see that your glabella is dark, and you have a lot of desires. You also harm people? You also eat people? Ning Chen's gentle lips slightly pursed, as if he couldn't win against her. He only said, there will be some strange things at the Ling Long banquet later. Don't be too surprised. Wei Bai sat on his shoulder and crossed her legs. Her face was cold. Oh, you're talking to a demon that eats people and harms people. Aren't you afraid that I will eat you? Ning Chen stood for a while. He felt that the little lotus fairy seemed to have a lot of mood swings. This thought was just a fleeting thought, and it didn't affect his mood. Just as he was about to lift his foot, he saw the peach blossoms in front of him suddenly wither. Countless petals flew up, condensing into a huge wave of peach blossom petals, attacking him. The rest of the guests disappeared. In the entire world of pink peach blossoms, only he and the little lotus on his shoulder existed. The young man walked forward, ignoring the peach blossoms as if they were nothing. Peach blossom petals suddenly transformed into countless musical instruments, playing seductive music. Behind the instruments, bewitching women wearing revealing dresses appeared. They were so beautiful that they could cause one's blood to boil. They started to sway their bodies, using all sorts of seductive looks to entice those who saw them. Wei Bai looked at those half-exposed breasts and those exposed long legs. She had an explosive figure and a face that was as beautiful as a fox spirit. She immediately asked the system, "Do I look like this?" System. Does it look good like this? Which part of these flirtatious sluts were good-looking? She's not as cute and delicate as the host. Wei Bai, the #1 beauty in the world has to be sexy, beautiful, and have a super good figure. The system silently glanced at the host's flat figure. It didn't dare to say that the #1 beauty it bought was delicate and pretty. The host's aesthetic sense was actually this? No wonder she always thought that the #1 beauty badge was not good enough. Being so flirtatious was too tacky, the supermarket wouldn't even sell it. Those women closed in step by step, playing their instruments, creating countless flirtatious images. Master, why don't you look at me? I've admired you for a long time. Holy monk, I can satisfy you no matter what you like. Wei Bai looked and blushed. Even a holy monk was tempted. She turned her head and saw Ning Chen's expressionless face. His eyes were calm, and his footsteps were firm as he walked forward step by step. He was completely indifferent to these beauties. Those women finally reached out, wanting to touch Ning Chen. In front of them, Ning Chen said lightly, "Break." On the peach blossoms, a golden light suddenly appeared, condensing into the shape of a magic wand, and smashed all the beauties to death. Wei Bai, the scene was so brutal that she had no adjectives to describe her feelings at that moment. The peach blossoms dispersed, and the women disappeared. Everything returned to how it was before. The guests did what they were supposed to do, and the peach blossoms were still blooming. The little lotus finally asked in a trembling voice, "Monk, what was that just now?" The young man replied calmly, "The exquisite leader has admired me for more than 3 years. Every time I came, she would set up a seduction array to seduce my desires." Wei Bai coughed softly. "Could it be that you were seduced?" The young man's voice was flat. "It's just a pink skeleton. I can just beat it to death." The little lotus was silent for a while, and suddenly asked carefully, "If I also admire you in the future and seduce you?" The young man tilted his beautiful eyelashes, and his eyes were calm and cold. He repeated softly, "Then I can just beat it to death." By Wei. At the crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www
Sashu.
Come download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Calm the fast Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Chapter 29-23. At the Ling Long banquet, in the peach blossom forest, Ning Chen walked to a seat. There was only a simple table and a simple futon. It was as if the host knew his personality and specially prepared it. The little lotus fairy sat on his shoulder with a cold face, arms crossed in front of her chest without saying a word. My appearance is illusory. Does this mean that my appearance is illusory or abstract? The system said, it means that your beauty is unique in this world, so beautiful that it's like an illusion. Wei Wei Bai touched his chin. Although this is just to fool me, it still feels good to hear it. The system quietly took out a book called A Narcissist's 100 Self-Praises. It was worth it to spend the 30 life points of his embroidery money. Look at how happy the host is. Not far from Ning Chen was another seat, a reclining chair.
No one was sitting.
The servant had already arrived, not only with wine and food. Ning Chen did not respond. He looked at the depths of the peach blossom forest. At the edge, there was an ice-colored light of the formation, like ribbons running around the entire palace. He looked at it for a while and realized that it was too quiet around him. The little lotus fairy was noisy all the way, so she was not used to the sudden silence. He glanced to the side and saw the little lotus with arms crossed in front of her chest. She pouted her lips and puffed up her breath, like a little squirrel stuffed with pine nuts. The young man was indifferent and stared at her for a while. She seemed to have noticed it and looked up at him. Then, she snorted and turned around, not looking at him angrily. Ning Chen also looked down, as if he did not understand why she was angry. He looked at the food on the table. Other than wine and meat, these were rare delicacies that were not usually seen. The Ling Long leader would always prepare these things. Whether it was beautiful women or illusions, gold, silver, or food. They were all trying their best to arouse his human desires. He had never touched them. Wei Wei Bai turned to the system and said, "This damn baldy. One look and you can tell that he's going to die alone." The system said, "He's supposed to die alone, he's a monk." He was an eminent monk, the leader of the entire Buddhism. If he dies alone, who dies alone? If other monks secretly die alone, no one would know even if they did not say it. But the male leader, his every move affected everyone's heart. If he wasn't old and lonely, how big of a wave would he cause? Perhaps all the monks would take him as their role model. From then on, monks would be able to marry. Wei Wei Bai also realized that a bald donkey really couldn't marry a wife, so she could understand his behavior. He had never seen a woman in his 8 lifetimes, never held a woman's hand, and never thought about what a woman would look like. Just thinking about it made him feel miserable. Suddenly, she heard a deep voice. "Hungry?" Wei Wei Bai sneered. "Isn't it better if you starve to death? The world will have one less monster and one less person to kill. You should be proud. This is your karma." Ning Chen was still as indifferent as before. After a long silence, he sighed. "Then he is hungry." He suddenly stretched out his hand and placed it beside his shoulder. There's a green pastry on the table. It's made from plant pearls and is very beneficial to plant fairies. The little lotus fairy pouted and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She mocked, "Who's going to eat your broken things, damn monk?" Ning Chen's expression was indifferent. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then forget it." Just as he was about to withdraw his finger, suddenly, his fingertips tightened. The little lotus had already stretched out her delicate and nimble little hand, grabbed his finger, and climbed onto his palm. Chapter 29-24. Wei Wei Bai sat on his palm and said coldly, "I'm hungry, monk." The youth's fingers paused. In the end, he didn't say anything and put her on the plate. The green pastry was in the shape of a flower. It was very beautiful. The pastry was a little shorter than Wei Wei Bai, but it was very big. This was indeed very big for the smaller Wei Wei Bai. She leaned over and kissed the big green pastry. Its fragrance assailed her nose. It seemed very tasty. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before saying, "This is for guests. It wasn't made by you, monk. So, I'm eating the food of the guests here. It has nothing to do with you." The youth's eyelashes drooped slightly. His dark eyes were calm. His thin red lips moved slightly. "It really has nothing to do with me. You can eat." This tone was no different from coaxing an insensible child. The little lotus fairy immediately smiled proudly. Then she leaned over and took a bite of the pastry. It was soft and sweet. Wei Wei Bai smiled. The little lotus fairy was wearing a pink lotus petal dress. The emerald green wristband on her small wrist was very cute. The youth's expression was still indifferent, but his eyes fell on her. A little demon. She hadn't harmed anyone. She was full of purifying spiritual energy, a type of demon that had never been seen before. She suddenly raised her head. The lotus buds on her long hair swayed. "Monk, aren't you hungry? Why don't you eat?" The youth's expression was indifferent.
He was about to say something.
The little lotus fairy tilted her head and said with a smile, "Don't tell me that food is also illusory. It's the same whether I eat or not." The youth pursed his thin lips and said softly, "The meat sack is still there. The necessary maintenance is still needed." Wei Wei Bai made a face at him. "I thought you would be so noble that you wouldn't even eat and directly become a Buddha. You would directly go to the Western paradise to be in love with your Buddha Lord." Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while. Suddenly, he reached out his finger and touched her head lightly. She felt that she was being crushed. She immediately reached out her small hands to support his palm. "Monk, if you can't convince me, I'll crush you to death." Ning Chen's tone was calm. "If you speak too much, sooner or later you'll blurt it out. Be careful what you say and do." Wei Wei Bai escaped from under his fingertips. "You're an old-fashioned monk. Don't train me to be a serious little nun. I'm going to be the most beautiful big demon in the future." The young man lightly exhaled before saying, "You have no ambition." Wei Wei Bai took a bite of the pastry. "You're so ambitious. You're always making tofu dumplings." Ning Chen suddenly sensed something and lifted her up expressionlessly. He placed her on his palm and then placed her on his knee. The little lotus spirit sat in his palm. It was small and soft, exceptionally cute and delicate. It was as if she would disappear if he closed his hand. The young man faintly shifted his gaze away. "Let the exchange begin. You can stay in my hands for now." Wei Wei Bai looked around curiously. He found that those who were eating, drinking, playing chess, or painting began to look into the sky. Countless peach blossom petals flew from the peach trees into the air, forming a beautiful pink platform. The platform turned into stairs. The sound of bells rang out. A woman wearing a celestial red dress with a beautiful bell bracelet on her wrist appeared. The numerous bells on the bracelet rang as the woman shook her wrist. This kind of bell sound was fragmentary, but it stirred people's emotions. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with both hands and sat in the monk's palm. She watched the woman with a hazy veil walk down the stairs step by step. Chapter 29-25. The shoes that were exposed under the skirt were also exceptionally exquisite and beautiful. She raised her finger, and countless petals flew up from all around her. A pink folding fan was born from the peach blossoms and came to her fingertips. Her voice was gentle and pleasant. "Thank you for coming to the banquet today. No matter if you are a demon, a Taoist, or a Buddhist, you can get what you want." These words of a Buddhist were faintly contained in her lips, incomparably sentimental. It made the ears of the people who heard it numb and hot. The woman glanced sideways at the silent monk who was sitting on the praying mat. Then, her gaze fell on the little flower demon in his palm. Her originally gentle gaze turned cold. Then, she looked at Ning Chen and was silent for a while. Then, she raised her fan and said loudly, "The first item to be traded today is a Taoist secret book, the Book of Unfettered Happiness. This Taoist friend hopes to exchange it for a gold-ranked alchemy furnace." Soon, a demon laughed and said, "Our ancestor wants this secret book. A Taoist secret book is not bad. I heard that the Book of Unfettered Happiness also has a list of aphrodisiacs. After eating it, one would be as free as an immortal and have 10 women in a night without any problems.
Huh.
As soon as he said that, both the demons and demons below began to giggle. As the host, the masked woman, who was also the exquisite school's leader, said with a smile, "Okay, the Book of Unfettered Happiness can be exchanged for a gold-ranked alchemy furnace. Please register and then transfer the item to my exquisite pavilion. The owner of the Book of Unfettered Happiness, please keep the hairpin and come here with the hairpin to receive the item." A servant carried a tray with a booklet on it. He walked over to the demon and pressed his thumbprint on the booklet. Then, he went to give the hairpin to the owner of the Book of Unfettered Happiness. The trade went smoothly. After all, it was an annual trade and auction. Countless people accumulated all kinds of unimportant treasures that could be exchanged for good things, waiting to exchange for what they wanted. There was even a scene where two parties fought over one item. The scene was very lively. There was enough wine and food. There were even a few beautiful dancers in the middle to liven things up. Bored, the little lotus fairy rolled around in the monk's palm and lazily said, "Monk, I'm full. What do you want to exchange? Is it here yet?" Ning Chen's face was silent. His delicate face gave people a kind of cold and indifferent temperament. He heard the little lotus in his hand grumble lazily. After thinking for a while, he lowered his head and said softly, "Soon." Wei Wei Bai turned over and sat up. "How fast? By the way, what do you want in exchange for what you want?" Ning Chen's calm gaze landed on her as he said in an indifferent voice, "You." Bai Weiwei was still holding her own hair, counting the strands. It was too boring. There was nothing to do. I heard him say you. He didn't react in time. You what? The youth's voice was as calm as ever, without a trace of fluctuation. I'll use you to exchange for what I want. Weiwei Bai immediately sat up straight and said, "Monk, did you bring me out just to trick me into exchanging things?" Ningchen looked at the peach blossom forest indifferently. He stroked her hair with his fingertips and said indifferently, "Yes and no." Weiwei Bai widened her eyes and jumped up with her hands on her hips. "How can you be like this? You speak like you're in Zen.
Who can understand you?"
"Yes is yes, no is no." He said one sentence. She replied with a pile of words. The speed of her words made the youth a little stunned. Finally, he lowered his voice.
"For the time being."
Chapter 29-26. Weiwei Bai was about to protest when a golden light appeared on his finger and turned into a rope. He tied her up and then waved a servant over. Absorb the lotus essence of the Wan Yuan Buddhist Temple's spirit pond. This is a magic tool that can purify any dark aura. It already has its own consciousness. Weiwei Bai was placed on the plate. She immediately rolled around, wanting to escape.
But she found that the plate was not right.
It was like a cage was binding her. She immediately shouted, "Monk, why are you so bad? I followed you because I trusted you, but you actually exchanged me for something. You're not a good person. You're even worse than me, this demoness." The youth looked at his empty palm and then looked up at Weiwei Bai, who was being carried up. After a long time, he sighed. "I already said that it's temporary. How did he become an unforgivable bad person? This little demoness was really too noisy. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 5. Weiwei Bai was lying on the auction table. When she heard the sound of the favorability, she was speechless for a while before asking, "Why did the favorability increase at this time?" The system thought for a moment before replying, "Maybe he's happy that you can exchange for something, so he gave you 2 points as a breakup fee." Weiwei Bai, that exquisite sect leader, turned around and came to the auction table. He saw Weiwei Bai lying on the plate. She was so small, but so cute that it made people's hearts melt. Even the experienced and knowledgeable Ling Long was momentarily stunned when she saw this. Something that was too beautiful made people feel pity for it, but also made people want to destroy it. Exquisite said softly, "I thought that having a living thing by his side moved his heart. I spent 3 years and still couldn't make him have a trace of human feelings, let alone move his heart. This kind of man actually brought you along. Fortunately, you're here for the auction. He's still an emotionless piece of wood. Wei Wei Bai was jumping around, trying to break free from the golden rope. She rolled around on the plate. His voice was tender and angry. That bald donkey isn't just a piece of wood, he's a bad piece of wood. He lied to me and said that he wanted to purify himself. In the end, I came with good intentions, but he actually sold me out. Ling Long's eyes turned cold. Slander. He is such a noble and cold person. Why would he lie to you? You are such a dishonest vixen. You deserve to be sold. After saying this, she shouted loudly, "There is a spiritual pool purifying magical artifact. It has already gained sentience and can be used to refine medicinal pills. It is a great supplement, in exchange for a great monk Saraira." Just as he finished shouting, someone immediately responded, "I have 10 Sarairas in exchange for that little toy." The one who stood up was actually the bull-horned demon king. His face was ferocious and ugly as he took out some relics from his bosom. The relics shone with a golden light. With one look, one could tell that these were the bones of a monk with extremely profound dermic powers. The bull-horned demon king laughed and said, "It took me 3 months of deployment to kill this bald donkey." That was the abbot of the 1000 Origin Temple. His dermic powers were very profound. If I hadn't threatened him with a city of people in the end, he wouldn't have been willing to let me kill him. After he finished speaking, he chuckled. "That little thing, let me take a closer look. It's really beautiful. I'll feed it until it grows up and warms my bed." Wei Wei Bai looked up. Holy shit. For someone with a face complex, it was an extremely lethal appearance. Ling Long's thin lips curled up slightly under the veil, and her voice became much louder. "Please press your fingerprint. You can take this little vixen away first. Then, please put the relic on the plate. I will personally hand it to Master Ningchen." Every time she said his name, Ling Long's tone would twist a few times. It contained a charm that seduced to the bone. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 29-27. A servant came up to pick up the black wooden plate, but saw the little lotus fairy sitting there, tied up with a rope, glaring at him. The little girl had a jade-like face and clear eyes. Her slender hands and feet were as white and tender as glutinous rice cakes. She was so beautiful that people were mesmerized by her. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a beauty before?" The servant immediately blushed and lowered his head to pick up the plate. He carefully held his breath and walked forward step by step. When he passed by Ningchen, the young man was indifferent. His eyes were indifferent, and his long fingers were pinching his prayer beads. The little lotus fairy jumped on the plate. "You bad monk, you sold me. I won't forgive you. You black-hearted ghost. You lied to me." The young man lowered his eyes and pursed his thin lips, but in the end, he remained silent and did not say anything. The ox-horn demon had a black face and fangs. He walked over with a smile, and when he saw Wei Wei Bai, his eyes lit up. He thought she was cute from afar, but when he looked closer, she was even cuter. If she grew up, he wondered how beautiful she would be. Wei Wei Bai frowned. He could not stand such an ugly face, so he went closer to her. "Is this ugly disease contagious?" "No way." She leaned back and said to the system with a cold face, "This guy, didn't his mother teach him not to go out when he's so ugly?" The system said, "This guy doesn't have parents, he came from a filthy place." Wei Wei Bai said, "How filthy, a septic tank?" The system said, "No, the so-called filth comes from those dark places. It's formed by the filth and evil thoughts gathered in the human world. This guy's power is very strong. Anyone who touches him will be corroded." Wei Wei Bai said, "So this is a septic tank with sulfuric acid added?" The system said, "The host has always rejected ugly people." When Bai Weiwei saw the bull-horned ugly monster, she reached out her hands with a covetous expression and said, "Come, let me hug you, cute little goblin." She only felt that those hairy fingers and that dark face were both challenging her limits. She leaned back and was almost touched by him. But the Empress Dowager fell backwards, her whole body directly onto the black wooden plate. When Ugly Person saw her like this, he was delighted to see such a small and soft person. He wasn't angry at all. Instead, he reached out to grab her. The young servant suddenly said, "Please put the Sarira on the plate." The smile on the ox-horned Ugly Person's face immediately disappeared. He coldly curled his lips. Humph, such a disappointing thing. Here. The Sarira was thrown onto the plate, and golden light splashed out. This was the trace of the power of the Almighty being injured by the fall. Wei Wei Bai was almost hit by the Sarira. She immediately rolled to one side as she was tied up, but was blocked by the black plate's enchantment. She couldn't jump out of the black plate, but was blocked by the power of the black plate. She was like a pitiful little glutinous dumpling, rolling back and forth. Seeing that she was about to roll into the hands of the ugly man, she angrily shouted, "Monk, if you don't save me, I will really hate you." Ugly Person sneered. "After the exchange, you are mine. Why are you still calling that bald donkey?" When Wei Wei Bai saw those hairy fingers coming towards her, she immediately closed her eyes and said to the system, "Buy me a bottle of disinfectant. I want to disinfect my whole body so that I won't be infected by Ugly Person's bacteria and become ugly." System. ? He thought that he understood the host well enough and had practiced his ability to praise. In the end, the host could still surprise him. Ugly Person's bacteria. Aren't all bacteria about the same? Chapter 29-28. You have me, demons and demons, beauty and ugliness all have bacteria. In the eyes of the host, bacteria can be divided into beauty and ugliness. Then he twitched the corner of his mouth and finally calmed down. "Well, I'll buy you the most effective one. I guarantee that once it's sprayed, it can immediately beautify the ugly bacteria and make them beautiful. You'll be satisfied." Wei Wei Bai nodded, satisfied. The system again. Just as that hand was about to touch the tofu-like delicate little demon. Suddenly, the ugly bull-horned monster paused. Its body emitted countless black gas, which turned into terrifying sharp blades and attacked wildly in all directions. But the black gas did not have any reaction and disappeared again. The golden light landed lightly on the bull-horned monster. Bit by bit, it entered the bull-horned monster. Xiaoling's whole body trembled. The finger that was about to touch Wei Wei Bai immediately retracted. Wei Wei Bai heard the movement and immediately opened her eyes, seeing the golden light formed by countless scriptures. The young man stood in the middle of the scriptures and slowly walked over. The beautiful golden light landed on his thick eyelashes and dyed his dark eyes, bringing out a strange and stunning luster. Ling Long was shocked and immediately shouted, "Ning Chen, you heard a guest at my Ling Long banquet. Don't blame me for being rude." As soon as the words fell, the blue halos around the peach blossom flew over like thousands of ribbons. The huge array began to operate. The Ling Long banquet could be held because of the Ling Long array, ensuring that no one could break it. Whoever hurt people here would not be able to escape the suppression of the array and would even be directly killed by the array. Following Ling Long's orders, the array began to emit a terrifying tsunami-like power, rushing towards the young man standing in the middle of the countless scriptures. The young man walked forward step by step, looking at the golden Zhouwen, shattering Xiaoling's black protection. Just as Xiaoling could not take it anymore, countless light blue transparent ribbons rushed over, breaking the golden light. Xiaoling was about to be saved. But he saw the young man unhurriedly stretch out his finger, passing through the blue ribbons. The terrifying power could not hurt him at all. He was neither sad nor happy. Red cinnabar, his fingertips came to the black plate. Wei Wei Bai immediately sat up, with a face full of desire. "Monk, you're here to save me." In the end, the young man's finger did not stop, and took the relic of the great monk, then looked up at the blue ribbons that kept coming. His voice was cold and distant. "I've been here for 3 years. Every year, I've been observing this place. This year, I've finally been able to crack this array formation. The exquisite banquet is a gathering of demons and demons. Most of the items exchanged are ill-gotten gains, and some are even obtained by taking lives. This place shouldn't exist. Buddha. The Tao was also formed, not to mention all kinds of demons and ghosts. They were all driven by their desires, and no one could escape from them. 2. Who would not? Even though he knew how dirty the underground transactions of the exquisite banquet were, he still chose to protect it just because it was beneficial to him. This was the second time the exquisite sect leader had been elected. For the first time, he set up the Linglong banquet and set up the Linglong array. Such a genius only did business with the three realms of Buddhism and Taoism. But in this generation it was time. The young man looked up indifferently, looking at the Linglong banquet standing on the peach blossom steps. You've crossed the line. In just a few years, this Linglong banquet had become a protected place for all kinds of dark transactions. It affected the interests of all parties, a den of evil that could not be touched. Oh, make it easier for you to read next time. You can click. Chapter 29-29. The exquisite hierarch smiled coldly. Ning Chun, you're really shameless. Even if you're the leader of Buddhism and the abbot of Wanyuan Temple, can you break the exquisite array? This array was set up by my mother herself. She's a genius, so don't even think about resisting this power. After a pause, the exquisite hierarch suddenly smiled sweetly. Her veil was lifted by the wind, revealing her delicate chin. She practiced the art of seduction and exchanged it for an evil secret book from the devil. She killed 10 virgin girls every month and bathed in their blood in exchange for beauty and youth. Her every move was even more seductive. She laughed, and the broken bells on her wrists jingled with the sound of tinkling. Monk, don't you want a woman? Since you were born in the temple, you haven't even touched a woman's hand. Ningchen looked at her indifferently and suddenly raised the prayer beads on his wrist. The black prayer beads separated from the prayer beads. The beads flew into the sky. 108 prayer beads formed a perfect circular array.
His voice was deep.
The exquisite array is presided over by you. In the end, it lost its purity. The evil aura invaded, stained the blood, and damaged the edge of the array. What kind of evil demonic arts did you practice? After saying that, his thin lips opened slightly. Those scriptures seemed to come from the distant mountains, from the long river, and from the vast and boundless deep sea. His voice was soft, and his words were slow. The prayer beads fell into the blue ribbon array one by one. The exquisite array began to shatter. Evil Bell took advantage of the moment when Ning Chun was destroying the array and suddenly roared. He stretched out his finger and grabbed Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai realized that the rope on her body had dropped. She jumped up and immediately ran with her head in her hands. Monk, the monster's going to catch me. It's going to catch me. She ran to the edge of the black plate. She realized that the enchantment of the plate was also gone. Behind her were the plush fingers full of ugly bacteria, and the black plate was far from the ground. Her body was light. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath and jumped out without hesitation. Evil Bell was about to change his method of fishing. However, he found that his finger was broken. The young man had already walked over. He raised his hand, and a golden ray of light caught Wei Wei Bai. Then, with a slight movement of his hand, she had already landed in the center of his palm. Wei Wei Bai quickly hugged one of his fingers and sobbed, "Monk, you tricked me into selling it. You're so evil." Ning Chun lowered his head, his jawline slightly tightened. A helpless expression appeared on his usually calm and indifferent face. "I said it's temporary." Wei Wei Bai threw a tantrum. "I don't care. I was almost eaten by a monster. You have to get justice for me." He looked at the little person rolling around in his palm. That soft and tender feeling lightly scraped against his palm. The young man lowered his eyes and moved his fingers. Then he froze. Without saying anything, he raised his other hand, and a golden light passed through Evil Bell's body. The humongous and ugly body began to crumble. The remaining relics on his body had already flown out and landed in the youth's sleeve. Ning Chun glanced at the relics in his hand indifferently. Among the Buddhists, his character is the purest. As the abbot of Qianyuan Temple, he also does the best in everything. Half a year ago, he came to meditate with me for 3 days. After that, he left and disappeared. I came to Bureau Linglong to test if anyone had killed the Buddhists. The young man carefully opened his palm, and a little lotus spirit sat on it. He turned sideways and looked at the sky. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2930. The beautiful blue ribbons fell one after another. Like blue stars, they broke apart in front of his eyes. He looked down at Wei Wei Bai, who was still sitting with her arms crossed and her mouth pouting. After a moment of silence, he asked calmly, "Why are you still angry? Didn't he kill Xieling?" Wei Wei Bai glanced at him. "Monk, you don't understand women." Ning Chen said indifferently, "You're not a woman, you're a demon." Wei Wei Bai was immediately unhappy. She jumped up and puffed out her chest. "How am I not a woman? Are you blind? Can't you see clearly? Can I come closer?" The young man glanced at her body and then looked away. "I see clearly. You're a lotus spirit, formed by heaven and earth. You have the ability to purify. In my eyes, there's no difference between men and women." Wei Wei Bai suddenly sat down and then turned around. She crossed her arms again and raised her head. She snorted and ignored him. The young man lowered his eyelashes. His eyes were calm, and there was a trace of confusion on his face. He didn't seem to understand why she was so noisy. What was she angry about? He thought indifferently and felt that it was more difficult to understand than those difficult Buddhist scriptures. Then he saw that the array finally began to shatter, and the ribbons disappeared. His golden scriptures had begun to fall on a large scale. On the contrary, the demons with the smell of blood died on the spot. He walked over, and the golden Buddhist light opened up a path. Beautiful flowers and plants grew out of the cracks in the ground. Those peach trees and floating cloud koi were also beginning to be destroyed by the real flowers and plants. Flowers bloomed one after another under the young man's feet. Countless creatures began to warmly welcome his aura. The young man looked at the rest of the Buddhists and Taoists. "It's not a good thing for you to be greedy. I don't want to kill you in the future and become a demon slayer. I will abide by my heart and be the demon slayer that always exists." After saying that, he walked towards the door. But the exquisite sect leader suddenly shouted, "Monk, you destroyed my exquisite feast, my exquisite array, and my foundation. I will break your hands and feet and make you into a human swine." After saying that, the exquisite sect leader suddenly removed her veil and danced. Countless bewitching fragrances assaulted him. Those Taoists who were originally stunned, as well as a few monks who could no longer maintain their composure, immediately shook their bodies. He had been charmed. Ning Chen paused and turned around. The aroma assaulted him. He sighed softly and placed the little lotus fairy in front of his chest. He asked in a low voice, "Do you like this fragrance?" Wei Wei Bai was already coughing and sneezing. "Do you think I like it? This is too suffocating. Could it be that it's not body odor?" Ning Chen's voice softened. "I also think it smells bad." Wei Wei Bai turned around and snorted. "Don't think that I'll forgive you just because you talked to me. I'm still angry, monk." The young man's expression froze for a moment before he pursed his lips as if nothing had happened and fell silent again. Then he recited a passage of scripture in a low voice. The fragrance was all gone. Those who were about to attack him regained their senses. Their expressions changed drastically, and they turned to attack the exquisite sect leader. The exquisite sect leader's dance halted, and he fell to the ground, receiving heavy blows from all directions, and spurted out a mouthful of blood. She lay on the ground, and a mournful expression appeared on her beautiful face. "Ning Chen, I've loved you for 3 years. Have you never taken pity on me? How could you treat me like this?" The young man's eyes were indifferent, and his voice was calm as he looked at her. "You're just a pretty skeleton. What's there to pity?" The exquisite sect leader's face was full of blood, and he laughed sinisterly. "Do you think I can't keep you? I want you to die with me." After speaking, she opened her mouth and was about to spit out the poisonous gas from the evil technique. However, she found that a golden exorcism wand was already hanging above her head, covering her. The young man's expressionless face was still expressionless. His eyes were cold and clear, bright and beautiful. Death is not to be regretted for harming others. If you don't change your mistakes, you'll be punished again. After speaking, he turned around coldly. When he reached the door, he suddenly thought of something and turned his face again. A trace of light appeared in his beautiful eyes. Also, you were wrong when you said that I have never touched a woman's hand in my life. He gently held the little lotus fairy in his arms. She is a woman, and I have touched her. After speaking, he stepped out of the door as if nothing had happened. The exorcism wand behind him fell. The exquisite sect leader let out a shrill scream, and then no sound came out. The little lotus fairy trembled. Ningchen noticed and said calmly, I won't hit you. Don't be afraid. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Monk, you'll never hit me, right? Ningchen looked down and was silent for a moment before slowly saying, That's not it. If you hurt someone, I'll still kill you with one strike. Bai Wei Wei. At the crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.
Sashu.
Download the read the full text. 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 To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record the reading record. Chapter 2931. The monk was destined to be a loner. He alone raised the standard of the loner model to a super VIP level. He was the monk's role model. Learn from him. Live a long life alone. Wei Wei Bai said to the system with a serious face, Don't learn this in the future. It's okay if you don't have a sweet mouth, but you beat me to death for no reason. Don't you have any manners? Strategy makes my heart ache. The system thought for a while and suddenly asked, If I suddenly meet an ugly monster like the ox-horn demon? Wei Wei Bai said expressionlessly, Don't explain. Remember to download the antivirus software and smash it a few more times so that it can't be revived. Delete it completely 10,000 times so that it won't appear in the system world and scare people. She was now the aggressor. If she didn't kill it first, what if she met such an ugly monster in the future? The system. Then it felt that it had to ask clearly, If I look like the ox-horn demon? Wei Wei Bai was silent. Then she laughed awkwardly. Our friendship is not something that can be judged by appearance. Am I the kind of bad person who would hurt my own people? Where is the form for you to change your system? I'll just look and not do anything. The system. Suddenly, its heart felt cold. The host liked beautiful things so much. It was so handsome. What if the host accidentally saw it and fell in love with it? She would be beaten by the male lead.
Die.
Wei Wei Bai said, Okay, I just spent 3 seconds to mentally prepare myself. Even if you're as ugly as bacteria, I won't despise you. I won't change you no matter who comes. Even if other systems are as handsome as Gu Tianle, they can't compare to you. The system was touched. It felt that its cold heart was poured with a cup of sugar water. It was about to say something. Then it heard the host say, My sweet-talking mouth has gone up another level, hasn't it? I'm really getting more and more beautiful. The system silently dug out the narcissist's words of praise and praised expressionlessly, Yes, you will always be the most beautiful person in this world. You are more beautiful than everyone. Every flower, every brick, every pot, every electric appliance, and every broom. There are thousands and thousands of things in this world, but you are the most beautiful. Wei Wei Bai, although I know it's just to coax you, it still feels good. The system reached out and touched her hair with its transparent fingertips. Yep, as I said, the host is easy to coax. He was really easy to coax. Saying that she was beautiful made her happy. When Ningchen returned, it was raining heavily. They sat on the vestments without a canopy. The rain was heavy. Normally, it would not matter, but now that Wei Wei Bai had shrunk, she simply did not know where to run. She immediately ran in circles and shouted, "Monk, I'm going to be smashed to death." Ning Chen lowered his eyes to look at her. The rainwater stained his eyelashes, and his eyes were clear. Then, he sighed softly, as if he had never seen such a tormenting little fellow. He could only stretch out his fair fingers and gently lift her collar. Then he put her into his collar. She hung on from the gap of the collar. The beautiful young man was expressionless. "My clothes are waterproof. You can hide here first." Wei Wei Bai's hair was wet. She reached out and grabbed her hair, afraid that the rain would make her bald. She immediately grabbed her hair and shook it dry while complaining, "Aren't you very capable? Monk, why don't you know how to block the rain and make an umbrella?" Ning Chen sat in the rain indifferently. The speed of the vestments did not change.
His voice was calm.
"Why should I hide from the rain? The rain is also one of the thousands of living creatures. It's nothing to hide from it." Chapter 2932. Wei Wei Bai struggled to put her hands on his collar, her body hidden under his neck. This short-haired bald donkey's clothes were warm. The youth's skin was very good, white and smooth. She was stuck at the collar, only revealing her head. The rain splashed on his clothes, but not a single drop was soaked. Suddenly, a drop of water fell. The little Wei Wei Bai immediately dodged and looked up. She saw the youth's fair and beautiful chin, where the rainwater gathered, dripping down. Wei Wei Bai immediately hid her face in his clothes, revealing a pair of clear eyes. She pressed against his skin. Her body was warm. She whispered, "Monk, why did you bring me here?" Ning Chen lowered his eyelashes. There were droplets of water on them, sparkling and translucent. "I brought you to purify my dark aura." The little lotus asked curiously, "You don't seem to have any dark aura now." The youth's voice was still clear and melodious in the rain. "Because I hid it." Wei Wei Bai tilted her head, puzzled. "Where did you hide it?" The youth was silent for a moment. "In my heart." Wei Wei Bai. What kind of Zen language was this? It was exhausting to talk to this damn bald donkey. The youth also felt that his words were too concise. He pursed his thin lips, moist and bright red. He then said softly, "I was born with a Buddha bone. It's too pure. The Ling Long banquet is a filthy place. Those who go there are all excessively lustful. If there are demons, the filth of slaughter is abnormally thick." He raised his eyes and looked forward. Wan Yuan Temple was already faintly appearing in the lush mountains. 3 years ago, I went to the Ling Long banquet because the sariras of great monks began to appear there. Buddhists had to be eminent and powerful monks. Only Buddhist cultivators with a kind heart would be able to produce relics after they died and were cremated. The abbot of Qian Yuan Temple was not the first victim. If there was a need, there would be a supply. But there were only a few great Buddhists. There were only a few who could produce sariras. Relics were mostly hidden in Buddhist temples for worship. How could there be so many of them for people to profane and barter? Therefore, the demons set their sights on the great monks who were still alive. The young man's voice was low and calm. Even as he spoke of such a terrifying matter, there was no trace of emotion. "Every time I go to the Linglong banquet, it's to observe the Linglong formation." The array formation was a work of nature. It could suppress so many demons, devils, and Buddhists. How could it be an ordinary object? Every time he returned from the exquisite banquet, he would go into seclusion for a month to study the array formations he saw. Last year, he had completed the blueprint, and this year, he had thought of a way to crack it. Only then did he go to the exquisite banquet again. "Every time I come back, I will be stained by the various dark auras from the exquisite banquet. They accumulate in the Buddha's heart and can only be expelled bit by bit through seclusion." Or he could go to the spirit pool and wash it off. After Ning Chen finished speaking, he felt that he had made a mistake. Usually, he was in Zen and did not speak much. He was also used to not talking much about anything. Why did he suddenly have so much to say? He quietly lowered his eyes and no longer spoke. However, the little lotus spirit was still chattering away. "Monk, the water on your chin is dripping onto me. Block it for me." Ning Chen. The little lotus spirit raised her voice again. Monk, your body temperature is high. I feel that you are dehydrated. Her current body was that of a lotus. Of course, she thirsted for water. Ning-chin, you can come out and get wet. Wei Bai, you are simply unreasonable. I am ignoring you. Ning-chen, what did he say wrong? This lotus spirit did not speak the same language as him? Why was she angry again? Below to record this reading record.
Comma.
Chapter 2933. Back at Wan Yuan Temple. Ning-chin jumped down from his robe, and the water vapor on his body instantly disappeared. To him, the rain was no big deal. His robe was waterproof, similar to a raincoat. And his innate ability could also evaporate the water vapor on his body in an instant. Ning-chin returned to the side of the spiritual pool, stretched out his hand, and gently touched the little fellow on his neck. His fingertips paused for a moment, and he hesitated for a moment before confirming the small position. It was the collar of her robe. He was afraid that if he grabbed too hard, he would break her little neck. After Ning-chin carefully lifted the little spirit out, he looked up and saw that she had fallen asleep. She lacked strength. That was why she was so tired. Ning-chin walked to the pool, lifted the little girl, and put her in the clean water and shook her. It was like the way a hot pot was rinsed, and rinsed. Suddenly, the little lotus spirit in the water spat a few times and woke up. Ning-chin calmly lifted her out of the water. Seeing that she had coughed out a few mouthfuls of water, she angrily scolded him in a soft voice. "Monk, are you trying to drown me?" He was silent for a while, then said indifferently, "You are a lotus, and you can't drown." Wei Bai said, "Who said that a lotus can't drown? I happen to be a lotus that can drown. Do you have any humanity, monk?" The young man pondered for a while, then shook his head. Humanity is the most deserving, because humanity represents all kinds of desires, all kinds of... Wei Bai raised her hand to stop him. "Don't talk, I don't want to kill you." Was this guy's brain made of cement bricks? He was too stubborn, too rigid. He was too inhuman. Ning-chen carried her with a calm face, but his eyelashes were slightly lowered, as if he didn't understand why she was angry. Bai Weiwei swayed under his fingers. "Monk, you want me to purify you. How do I purify you, ah?" Ning-chen raised his head and looked around before saying, "Let's go to the meditation room. You can sit in front of me and absorb some of the dark aura. You're still young, so you might not be able to handle too much." Wei Bai, who was originally still in the shape of a blowfish, immediately flattened. She sighed. "Monk, you're finally speaking human language. I'll reluctantly absorb more black gas to make you feel better." Ning-chen reached out and placed her on his palm. Hearing her words, he paused for a moment, but didn't say anything. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 6. Wei Bai, this increase in favorability is simply not something that a human can achieve. She even asked the system, "Do I have a grudge against him? Did Lotus kill his parents or make him a monk?" This increase in favorable impression points was simply too stifling. The system flipped through the information. "No, the two of you don't have any enmity. You don't even have any interactions. The only interaction is that you've been drinking his bathwater." Wei Bai, the system immediately corrected him. "Your lotus body drank it, not you." Wei Bai, puke. Ning-chen walked back to his meditation room and sat on the futon on the ground. The prayer beads on his fingers flew out and surrounded him, emitting a golden light. He put his hands on his knees and looked down at Wei Bai, who was sitting on his knees. "Don't force yourself." Wei Bai's face was cold. "It's best if you die. Who's willing to force themselves for you?" Ning-chen nodded in agreement. "That's good. If you accidentally absorb too much and die, wouldn't I have committed a sin of murder and added another resentful spirit's aura? It's troublesome to purify it." Wei Bai. "The system. Prince Charming, come here." "The system. Prince Charming, come here." "System. Prince Charming, come here." "The system. Prince Charming, come here." Download the at https://m/sashu. Calm at the bottom to record this chapter. The book, please recommend it to your friends, QQ, blog, WeChat, etc. Chapter 2934. She reached out and silently touched her heart, feeling a heart attack waiting for her. Is this human language? Why is it even more disgusting than the system of the first plane? Ningchen saw that her face was even colder. She seems to be angry again? Is this lotus inflatable? She gets angry so easily. His eyes were indifferent. His fingertips fell lightly on her hair, rubbing it lightly. It messed up her hair, making the lotus bud tremble. Wei Wei Bai immediately covered her head with both hands. Monk, what are you doing? Ningchen looked at her indifferently for a while, then said calmly, You're so easily angered. How can you become a big demon? Wei Wei Bai snorted coldly. You don't need to care about what I become. You said that you'll kill me with a stick when I become a big demon. Ningchen stared at her quietly for a while, then said indifferently, but there was a trace of undetectable hesitation. If you don't hurt people, I won't hurt you. Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes at him. You fool, who coaxes girls like you. The more I listen, the angrier I get. You should sew up your mouth. You'll be accumulating merit if you don't say anything. After saying that, she coldly turned around and crossed her arms in front of her chest, saying, I'm angry. Don't talk to me. If you ignore me, I'll ignore you too. The young man looked at her quietly for a while, a trace of confusion appearing in his dark eyes. How could she get angry over this? What a strange little demon. He sighed lightly, thinking that he shouldn't be confused about this. After all, she was just a newborn little demon. Although it took 100 years for her to become a demon, it didn't mean that she had 100 years of wisdom. Maybe she had a 10-year-old mind? He stretched out his hand, and the light of Buddha appeared on his fingers. Then he pressed his hand on his chest, and the golden light of Buddha opened the dark place. A dark aura appeared. The hideous and terrifying darkness surged out from the place that was glowing. Roaring, surging, silent evil spirits constantly twisted and merged, but they couldn't escape the seal of the Buddhist prayer beads. They could only surge in the entire Buddhist temple. It was like hell on earth. The twisted heads and countless bony hands seemed to be dragging someone into the abyss. Wei Wei Bai was shocked as well. Monk, why don't you say that there's so much black qi? You must be a paste. You'll be stained with it whenever you pass by. That's why you've accumulated such a terrifying thing. Ningchen quietly lowered his eyes. His face was pale, but his tone was still calm. It's only a part of it. Humans are too stubborn. I can kill demons and demons, but I can't get rid of these things. It was so dark, so sinister. It was the accumulated desire of countless humans. The fiendish demons were merely intermediaries. He killed demons and saved people, but in the end, he was tainted with the negative karma and black energy of countless people. There was no way to resolve it. Although the innate Buddha bone allowed him to gain a faster understanding of source abilities than any other Buddhist cultivator, it also brought about terrible repercussions. His voice was indifferent. If you can't purify it, you can leave. After all, this is indeed a little scary. Wei Wei Bai immediately frowned. It's not just scary. Where did you get so many ugly monsters? Can't you give them plastic surgery to make them look better? After saying that, she took a deep breath and jumped out, leaving the protection of his Buddhist light. Countless darkness seemed to have met a purifier and dissipated around her. Wei Wei Bai's face also began to turn pale. She had difficulty breathing and her body was extremely heavy. Although the nature of the lotus was to purify, there was a limit to it. There were so many of them. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and said to the system, Give me an air purifier or something and help me purify this thing. Chapter 2935. System. As expected of the host, you're willing to risk your life for favorability points, even sacrificing your life points. Then the host complained, These things are too ugly. Take them away quickly. I feel like if my eyes look at them for too long, they'll pollute my beautiful eyes and infect me with ugly bacteria. System. Very good, that's very host. Ning Chun thought she would purify a portion of it. After all, her abilities were limited. He didn't want her to purify all the dark energy in the house. He just wanted to scare her. Nothing good would come out of her sticking to him. Although he didn't know why she liked to follow him, he didn't want her to follow him all the time. With so much dark energy, it should be enough to scare her away from sticking to him. Ning Chun looked up indifferently at the darkness in the sky. In the light of Buddha, countless dark energy was still pouring out. He was about to stop releasing the dark energy. Suddenly, his body felt lighter. Then, he saw the little lotus fairy walking step by step towards the darkest part of the house. Wherever the little body went, the dark energy would be purified into white fragments. His eyelashes trembled slightly, his eyes trembled, and his thin red lips pursed slightly. She shouldn't be able to stand it. She was still purifying. System. How is it? An air purifier that can purify smog can easily absorb a little bit of dark energy. Do you want to absorb all of it? Bai Weiwei walked forward step by step, unhurried, but she didn't feel uncomfortable at all. No, let the bald donkey bear more of the darkness. Let him suffer and remember my good. I'll let him feel comfortable for a few minutes and then feel uncomfortable, then he won't be able to get rid of me. System. Why did it sound so much like a criminal case of selling addictive drugs? The host really was a heartless and unscrupulous person. Ning Chun saw the ferocious dark energy pouring into the little lotus fairy's body. Then it was purified into fragments by her body. She stood in the darkness and the white fragments, her black hair fluttered, and her lotus bud began to wither. Her little body was trembling. Ning Chun clenched his fingers, his fingertips touching his palm. Finally, he whispered, "Don't purify anymore. You can't take it." She was just a little demon that was just born, so this much dark energy would destroy her. Weiwei Bai's footsteps paused. She suddenly turned around and said with a smile, "Oh, monk, you feel bad for me." Ning Chen's face froze for a moment before his voice faded. "Stop, I'm much better." He really felt much better, because she had absorbed too much dark energy. He moved his finger away from his chest and did not release any more dark energy. However, there was still some dark energy floating in the room. Weiwei Bai opened her arms and suddenly took a deep breath. "Monk, you see, I've sacrificed a lot for you. You're not allowed to drive me away or say unpleasant things to me in the future. Otherwise, you'll be considered ungrateful, okay?" As soon as he finished speaking, all of the dark aura disappeared. Meanwhile, Weiwei Bai squatted down in a daze, her entire body trembling. Due to excessive absorption and excessive purification, her body suddenly became much bigger. This was the result of the body growing due to the excessive power that was still in a contest of strength. Ning Chen's face finally changed slightly. He was about to say something. However, he saw Weiwei Bai, who had already grown up to the height of an ordinary woman. The lotus bud on her head had already withered. She suddenly stood up and turned around to smile at him sweetly. Then she ran in front of him and bent down to say, "Hey, monk, I've become taller." Ning Chen's lips were a little pale. He saw that her beautiful face was completely pale. He was about to say something. Weiwei Bai had already lowered her head and kissed him. A light kiss, a fresh fragrance of flowers, and a place that had never been touched before was touched by someone. That soft touch swept across Ning Chen's heart like a tsunami. His calm eyes widened in an instant. However, Weiwei Bai waved her hand and immediately said, "Okay, I've purified the dark energy for you. I'm leaving." After saying that, she turned around and ran out. However, before she could run 2 steps, she swayed and suddenly fell. Ning Chen immediately got up and reached out to catch her. But all he could do was hug a dull lotus. The lotus was lusterless and lay in his arms on the verge of death. Ning Chen's beautiful brows slightly furrowed. He finally sighed. "Why do you have to do this?" Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Chapter 2936. Weiwei Bai was stunned. She stretched out her wrinkled leaf and touched her pitiful faceplate. The flower was also wrinkled and did not have any beautiful luster. She felt that if she was a human now, her body was dry, her skin was dry and rough, and even her face was wrinkled. She was now an ugly flower. Fortunately, she was not human. She did not want to see herself become wrinkled, dry, and yellow like a ghost without water. Bai Weiwei pitifully touched her plate with her face, painted on it. Because the air purifier had purified too much, the purified dark aura turned into power and poured into her body. It made her grow bigger, and then the power was used up and she became small again. Because of the excessive use of power, the petals were dry. Sitting next to her, a young man in a white robe was holding the prayer beads with his fingers. He lowered his eyes and thought for a while before saying cautiously, "You're just short of water. Drink more water, and you'll be fine." Weiwei Bai was angry. "Drink your bathwater? You bathe here every day. The water I drink is not clean anymore." Ningchen was silent for a moment and finally spoke carefully again. "Then I'll go elsewhere." This was the spirit pool that could purify the filth. The rest were not effective. Weiwei Bai raised the leaf with difficulty and became even angrier. "Where are you going? Are you going to give your bathwater to other little demons?" Ningchen. He suddenly felt that it was better not to speak. It seemed that she would be angry no matter what he said. What was she angry about? Ningchen thought indifferently. He couldn't figure it out. It was too difficult. Then, he turned slightly to the side and sat cross-legged on a huge lotus leaf. The lotus leaf swayed gently as he turned his body. "Weiwei Bai, monk, do you think I'm ugly and don't look at me anymore?" The young man was silent for a while. Should he talk to her or not? If he did, she would be angry again. "Weiwei Bai, monk, you kissed me and you want to go back on your words, right? You don't even look at me because I'm ugly."
Scumbag.
Scumbag, what was that? Ningchen pondered with an expressionless face. Finally, he sighed and turned around. The helplessness in his voice began to become obvious. "I didn't. It's you." At this point, the young man quietly lowered his eyes and silently turned his back to her, silently chanting the sutra. He was not good at arguing about this. The little lotus fairy held her own face and lowered her head bitterly. "Will I be so ugly in the future, monk?" Even the #1 beauty badge couldn't save her face from being poisoned by the dark fog. Sure enough, after seeing too many ugly people, one would become an ugly person. Ningchen silently counted the prayer beads. He didn't say anything. On the calm surface of the water, countless lotuses stood quietly. Only a small lotus was chirping nonstop. It was as if he had always preferred peace and quiet throughout the years. When had he ever had such a noisy little thing by his side? No one disturbed him, so he didn't disturb others either. Everything in the world, even the hell created by the dark aura, was often silent. Ningchen quietly looked at the black sandalwood bead on her finger and sat on the green lotus leaf. Beside him, the little lotus fairy stretched out her dry leaves and hooked the corner of his clothes. "Monk, you're in a daze again. Are you avoiding me? Do you think I'm ugly?" Ningchen was pulled by her leaf. Because of the extra force, the lotus leaf lost its balance and was on the verge of collapsing. The little lotus fairy pulled him to her side. The young man looked up at her and suddenly said indifferently, "You're not ugly." Weiwei Bai coldly glanced at the plate on her face. "You're lying." The young man sighed softly and then said in resignation, "You're very beautiful." As soon as these words fell, the leaf that was hooking him suddenly lost its strength. Quick, comma. Chapter 2937. The leaf under him swayed again and left her side. The young man turned his head as if nothing had happened and didn't say anything again. It was as if the sentence just now was not said by him. The little lotus fairy also didn't say anything. She just stood there quietly with her petals lowered, as if she was looking at the fish swimming quietly under the water. The young man was silent for a long time, but he didn't hear the little lotus speak again. Angry again? He looked to the side strangely and wanted to look back, but felt that he cared too much about a flower. A strange ripple appeared in his calm heart. Like the water under the lotus, it kept spreading. Ningchen gently turned his head to look at her, but he found that she was holding her petals with her leaf. The petals that had no luster just now, but they were dyed with a charming red,
although the leaf was still dry.
But the petals were really beautiful, bright but not charming, like a beautiful thing that came out of the clear water, clear and beautiful. Ningchen faintly lowered his eyelashes, covering the strange fluctuations in his black eyes. Then he got up and stood steadily on the young man on the lotus leaf. He jumped down and stood on the water. The Buddha beads were still floating in the air, following his footsteps. He walked to the edge of the water and was about to leave. The little lotus fairy behind him suddenly said, "Monk, you're also old and handsome." Ningchen's footsteps paused and he almost knocked into the stone by the water. He was silent for a long time and finally sighed. He felt that he really didn't understand the thoughts of a lotus. Then he turned and left. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 13. Wei Bai, this stingy little bald donkey, can't he properly increase his favorability? Others would increase it by 5 or 10 points. After so long, he would increase it by 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, and so on. Bai Weiwei felt that her disheveled face was rounder with anger. She cupped her face with Yi and said to the system, "Restore me to my original state, BA. Seeing my own Yi so ugly, I'm sad." Ah. Yes, most of the dark side effects were absorbed by the purifier. In fact, she had only absorbed a small amount. She was just fooling bald Donkey Ning. There was no other way. She deliberately turned ugly to act pitiful. He wanted to see if he could get more favorable impression points. The system silently restored her to her original state. It watched as the host turned back into a beautiful and bright flower. Wei Bai stared at the water. Through the hazy water surface, he still couldn't see his appearance clearly. However, one could tell that she was the most beautiful flower here. That was enough. Wei Bai said, "I've never seen my face turn into a human." There was not a single mirror in sight. Bald donkeys didn't need to comb their hair and didn't need to worry about their hairstyle. Therefore, they didn't even bother to buy a mirror. What a bunch of ugly monks with no aspirations. The system said, "Believe in badge. You are the prettiest and no one can be prettier than you. Believe in professionals, believe in supermarkets, and believe in legitimate products." Bai Weiwei touched the plate on her face, then nodded. Yes, she was in a good mood. Even if the stingy monk's favorability didn't increase, with this face, it was still pleasing to the eye. The 1,000 yuan temple held another Dharma assembly. The young man sat on the lotus platform. His pale face was silent. The red cinnabar was still bright, but it couldn't suppress his cold temperament at all. Everyone sat cross-legged quietly below, listening to Ning Chen's clear voice. It was not easy for Buddhists to practice Zen. Every time Ning Chen held a Dharma assembly, it was the time when they were most sincere and serious. Download the https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2938. At this moment in Wanyuan Temple, regardless of whether it was winter or drought, flowers would bloom and cranes would land on the ground. All living things with spirituality would instinctively get close to Ningchen. The floating prayer beads were wrapped around his wrist, and the golden tassel fell beside his leg. His fingertips were pale and pure like snow. Suddenly, the golden tassel was tugged by someone. Ningchen opened his thin lips slightly and was explaining the sutra. His tone suddenly paused, and when no one noticed anything strange, he continued the explanation just now. The young man's voice was pleasant and cold. When it entered the ears, it washed away the distracting thoughts in the mind. The little person grabbed his tassel and climbed up. She even kicked his leg. This made Ning Chen's eyelashes tremble slightly, but he still did not lower his head and maintained his calm appearance. Wei Bai, who had once again spent a lot of money, bought the damn transformation sticker again, wanting to gain the monk's favorability. Otherwise, She would have to stay in the spiritual pool every day. Even if she waited until the lotus flowers withered, she might not gain the monk's favorability. Bai Weiwei grabbed the tassel and hugged a floating Buddhist prayer bead. Like a swing, she shook it, then with a tug, she let go. She instantly fell into Ning Chen's arms. The young man, who was still explaining calmly, finally looked to the side and saw Weiwei Bai falling towards him while covering her face. She shouted, "Monk, I'm going to fall to my death. You have to catch me." Under the lotus platform was a very high flight of stairs. If she fell, even if her body was light, she would still be injured. The young man, who was originally holy and cold, finally showed a trace of helplessness on his face. He sighed faintly, stretched out his beautiful fingertips, and spread them out. The little person fell right into his palm. The sudden touch was soft. Her lotus dress was also very pink, giving people the feeling that she was a glutinous rice ball. This sudden turn of events interrupted the rhythm of the explanation. The young man pursed his thin red lips and lowered his eyes. His eyes reflected her body that was rolling on his fingers. She sat up with difficulty and immediately showed him a cute smile. She even winked at him. "Monk, I miss you. So I came to find you." Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while before he casually placed her on his knees. Then he looked up again. He looked at all the monks who were dumbfounded.
His voice was still calm.
"Continue." The old monk at the side immediately lowered his head and obediently knocked on the wooden fish. Weiwei Bai sat in his palm curiously, looking left and right. "Monk, it's fine if you're not interesting, but you've even nurtured a bunch of even more boring monks. Can't you do something fun?" Ning Chen ignored her. It was as if there was nothing more important to him than explaining the scriptures. Weiwei Bai snorted coldly. She suddenly raised her hand and blew on her sharp fingernails. Then he scratched his palm. Ning Chen's expression was calm. Weiwei Bai coldly snorted and scratched her fingertips. His skin was really thick. He couldn't even scratch it. She frowned and lowered her head. Her 10 fingernails lit up, and then she scratched quickly, as if she was digging the ground. Finally, Ning Chen's eyes trembled slightly, and his fingertips trembled. His voice explaining the scriptures also lowered. "Weiwei Bai, scratch, scratch, scratch. You stingy bald donkey." Under the warning of the sound of the wooden fish, everyone lowered their heads again and began to listen to the scriptures carefully. In the end, they couldn't hear it, because the young man on the stage didn't speak. They looked up again, only to see the young man on the lotus platform squinting his eyes and quietly looking at his palm. Chapter 2939. This was the first time they saw such a serious expression on their abbot's face. It seemed like he had encountered some unsolvable problem. Ning Chen was silent for a while before he turned his head and said in a low voice, "Do your homework for the rest." Then he closed his fingers gently. His beautiful fingertips were like a wall, preventing the person inside from falling out. Then he turned and left. Once he was out of everyone's sight, he said softly, "Nonsense. You're just a demon. How can you go to this kind of Dharma assembly? There are plenty of demon slayers among the Buddhist cultivators who are participating in this Dharma assembly. A weak little demon, like you can be crushed to death with one finger." Weiwei Bai sat up straight and hummed delicately, "I miss you." Ning Chen stopped in his tracks. He felt like they were communicating from different worlds. Why is she so disobedient? Back in the meditation room, Ning Chen put her on the table and took out a bead from the prayer beads. "Don't force yourself to transform into a human form. It's too damaging to your foundation. Besides, you've been on land for a long time, and lack of water will cause your cultivation to regress." After saying that, the prayer bead on his pale fingertips fell into her arms. She hugged the prayer bead and was stunned. Then she looked up. "Is this for me, monk?" Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while before nodding indifferently. "I wanted to give it to you before, but you were too noisy. So I gave it to you today." He wanted her to be a lotus for a while longer. That way, his ears would be quieter. What he didn't expect was that she forced herself to transform into a human to find him. Weiwei Bai hugged the large prayer bead. Suddenly, Tears fell from her beautiful eyes. Monk, you're really a good person. This is your life feed. You're giving it to me, aren't you? Ningchen didn't want her to be too grateful.
He didn't care about this.
However, he heard the little lotus fairy say, "Do you like me?" The young man lowered his eyelashes and looked at her quietly for a while. Suddenly, he reached out and wanted to take the prayer bead from her arms. "Forget it, just give it back to me." Bai Weiwei immediately hugged the prayer beads and opened her mouth to bite his finger.
It was a small bite mark.
It didn't hurt at all. It only itched. His fingertips paused. However, he saw Weiwei Bai snort coldly. "Monk, if you give it to me, it's mine. How can you snatch it back? You're shameless." Ning Chen's eyes were calm. After a while, he took back his finger as if nothing had happened and didn't say anything. Then he turned around to get the teacups and began to pour the tea. When no one was paying attention, his fingertips lightly touched the difference, but they froze. Then, Weiwei Bai heard the favorability notification sound. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 15. Weiwei Bai. Bah, he's so stingy that he doesn't look like a man. Weiwei Bai studied the Buddha beads and realized that the Buddha beads were filled with flowing energy. She took a deep breath and the energy instantly surged into her body. Before she could react, she had already fallen from the table onto the floor. When Ning Chun heard the commotion, he immediately turned his head. His gaze landed on the ground, but he suddenly froze. Weiwei Bai touched her waist and looked up. Her bright red lips were slightly pursed. She tilted her head and said unhappily, "Monk, what are you looking at? My waist hurts." The young girl sat on the ground. Her pink dress hung down messily, revealing her white jade feet that were slender and delicate. Her long hair fell to the ground, as smooth as ink silk. Her eyes were like the mist of a spirit pool, hazy yet clear. There was a contradictory beauty that could turn all living things upside down. She had once become bigger, but it was shrouded in darkness and her figure was illusory, so he couldn't see it clearly. However, he never thought that he would suddenly see her in her physical form or even her mature form. She was a beautiful demon that could bring chaos to the world. Ning Chen held the teacup in his hand. He suddenly turned around and said to her, "You've absorbed too much energy. You need to go to the spirit pool to digest and cleanse it. Take the Buddha beads with you. If you don't have enough energy, you can absorb it." Weiwei Bai jumped up. Only then did she realize that she had grown up. She immediately smiled. "Monk, I've grown up." Ning Chen's tone was calm, and she immediately picked up the Buddha beads. Then, she happily turned around and ran away. "This thing is very useful." "Thank you, monk." Ning Chen expressionlessly turned around. When he saw Weiwei Bai at the door, she suddenly turned around and pointed at her bright red lips. "Right, monk, am I beautiful when I've grown up?" Ning Chen. Weiwei Bai laughed happily, and then left. Ning Chen stood in place. His eyes were still indifferent. Then he slowly raised the teacup in his hand and took a sip. The tea was cold. As for him, his chest began to heat up. Was this a desire? After he finished drinking the tea, he slowly let out a sigh of relief. Then, he softly muttered to himself, "What a big trouble." Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 20. And read the at https://www.sashu.com/the and read the at https://www.sashu.com/ and read the at https://www.sashu.com the and read the at https://m/sashu.com at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2940. Weiwei Bai was squatting on a lotus leaf, holding a black prayer bead in her hand, thinking about how to eat it. The system said that if this thing could be completely digested, then she would be able to maintain her human form for a long time and would not shrink. But the prerequisite was that she could completely digest it. If she couldn't digest it and stuff it in, it would, bang, explode. Wei Wei Bai hesitated, but still felt that it would be too ugly to explode. So she put the prayer bead in her sleeve. This lotus dress could change size according to her body shape, and even the sleeves had pockets to store things. Sure enough, being a fairy had its benefits. At least it could save on clothes. Because clothes could change size by themselves, and they could also clean themselves. Wei Wei Bai held her face with both hands. I need to find a mirror. The system. The strategy wasn't important, the mirror was. Then it reminded her. You're a fairy, a big fairy. Staying in the spirit pool is still within the male lead's range, so no one dared to come over, so no one noticed you. Now there are a lot of demon slayers outside, so you'll probably be killed if you run out. Actually, the host wasn't a fairy. She was still a normal lotus. Her human nature was also, because of the sticker. But the sticker couldn't fight against the heavenly axiom. It could only last a little bit each time, and it couldn't let the host grow. But the male lead's prayer beads could. The prayer bead's power was used on the sticker. The sticker had an endless supply of power. It allowed it to produce a huge amount of power to fight against the heavenly axiom, turning the host's normal plant body into a human form. But as a fairy without a fairy's aura, she had the purification ability of the lotus. Other than drinking more water than humans, she had no other specialty. Right? Was narcissism considered a specialty? If it was, then the host was still invincible. Wei Wei Bai sat on the lotus leaf, silent, as if she was thinking hard about something. The system waited silently. It was probably some sort of strategy that was about to be created. Finally, Wei Wei Bai's expression softened. Okay, I'll go find the monk and ask him to buy me a mirror. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin again. No, this won't do. The monk doesn't look like a good person who would buy a mirror for others. His favorability is too low. I'd better increase his favorability first. System. We've finally gotten back to the walkthrough. It really wasn't easy. Wei Wei Bai stepped on the surface of the water. Her body was still as light as a feather. Even if she transformed into her human form, it was only the weight of the lotus. He could walk on water. It was already dark. Several oil lamps were lit in the meditation room. It was a little dim. However, Ningchen was not bothered at all. Instead, he lowered his head and flipped through the scriptures. Her fair fingertips landed on the scripture, glistening like jade. His features were handsome and his expression was calm. Suddenly, he realized something and heard a sweet laughter. His eyes turned cold as he slowly raised his head. He saw a beautiful pink dress hanging down from the crossbeam. A pair of slender and exquisite feet were faintly discernible under the dress. Above that was the beautiful white color of her calves. He paused slightly but did not say anything. He continued to flip through the scriptures. The woman asked, "Monk, am I beautiful?" Ning Chun was indifferent. The woman suddenly poked her head out from the beam. Her exquisite and beautiful face could charm almost everyone in the world. It was Wei Wei Bai. Why are you looking at this broken thing again? Don't you want to look at me again? Ning Chen finally sighed. That was why he said it was troublesome. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. 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 Chapter 2941. He had too much darkness on him, and it condensed into a hell that circulated in his Buddhist heart. Even if the little lotus fairy could purify it, she couldn't purify a hell. She could only make him feel better and even clearer so that he could continue to suppress this dark hell. But hell was more like a demon that had its own thoughts and consciousness. It was smart and cunning, cruel and twisted. His Buddhist heart was stirred up by the little demon, and a crack appeared. And this crack was known by the dark hell. In the future, it would no longer be a mountain of bones, but temptation. It turned into her appearance to continue to tempt him. Ning Chen stretched out his hand expressionlessly, and a faint Buddhist light appeared on his fingertips. The woman formed by the dark aura had already sat on the table and was lying on the scriptures, looking at him seductively. Monk, aren't you going to touch me? I'm so soft. Ning Chen stretched out his hand and gently tapped the middle of her forehead. You should stop. Sooner or later, I will have a way to completely purify you. The dark aura that turned into Wei Wei Bai suddenly had a ferocious expression, and its body shattered little by little. Old stubborn man, just you wait. Your Buddhist heart has been stirred, and your desire has been born. You think you can destroy us?
Dream on.
I'll wait to completely pull you into hell and let you suffer a fate worse than death. I'll let you completely fall and become a demon, spurned by thousands of people in the world. At that time, you will be as filthy as us, as beyond redemption. As soon as he finished speaking, the dark aura that turned into a human figure dissipated in the Buddhist light, just like that. Ning Chan withdrew his finger as if nothing had happened, and then continued to read. Just as he was about to flip through the pages, he heard a delicate voice. Monk, you're actually reading scriptures. It's too boring. Ning Chen's fingertips paused, and the Buddhist light faintly appeared again. The illusion came again suddenly, a pair of hands pressed down on his scriptures. Monk, are you in a daze? Why aren't you replying? Ning Chen looked up and saw the girl looking at him expressionlessly. She was frowning as if she was dissatisfied with his neglect. Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while. He finally relaxed a little and retracted the Buddhist light on his finger. Then he said slowly, since I have nothing to do, I'll just review it. It's not boring. Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to blindly decipher these antique scriptures with him. She immediately grabbed the table, lightly jumped up, and sat on his scripture. Monk, I want to buy something from you. Ning Chen's expression was still indifferent, but his eyes fell on the scripture under her skirt. After a moment of silence, he said, What is it? Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin and giggled. Buy me a mirror. I'm so big now. I must be very beautiful. But there are no mirrors in the temple. I can't even see my own face. Ning Chen's tone was flat. Your appearance is just. Before he could finish his words, his face was pulled. The young girl's slender fingers pinched his cheeks. Say it.
Say it again.
My appearance is illusory. You're just jealous of my beauty. You're about to go bald, ugly and gossipy, and you still have the nerve to talk about my appearance? Are you worthy? Ning Chen, bald donkey, was a little unpleasant to hear. For a moment, he couldn't react. Then he remembered that he had forgotten to cut his hair. His hair had grown to the back of his neck. Because there were too many miscellaneous matters, plus the destruction of the Linglong banquet and the death of the Linglong sex leader. Buddhism was now under great pressure. Demons and devils were now attacking the disciples of Buddhism. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2942. Some of the Taoist regulars at the exquisite banquet were also dissatisfied with his methods of destruction. Unlike Buddhists, Taoists were more freewheeling. Therefore, they were willing to exchange for many things at the exquisite banquet. They didn't care if these things came from clean sources. Therefore, these days, they sent people every day to reprimand him for his ruthlessness towards the exquisite banquet. These things weren't a big deal, but they were messy. For a moment, he didn't think of cutting his hair again. Ning Chen reached out indifferently and held her fingers. The girl's soft fingertips were too fragile. His strength froze for a moment. Then he returned to normal and put her fingers down. Mirrors are what evil creatures like to attach themselves to. Recently, demons have been running rampant. You're a new demon spirit, and one that was nurtured by a Buddhist spiritual pond. You're not on the same path as them. You don't have to harm others. You can continue to purify yourself and cultivate with me. His voice was faint and clear, as if he could clean her ears. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but reach out and pick her ears. Her brain was numb. No matter what he said, she couldn't help but agree. Was this the king of transmigration marketing? With his voice, it was no wonder that the bald monk could sit there for so long just to listen to her explain the scriptures. After all, this voice and this rhythm of speech were not boring at all. Then Wei Wei Bai said, I want a mirror. Ning Chen's temper was still very good. There is no mirror. Mirrors are not good things. Wei Wei Bai, then how can I see my own face? Ning Chen, what's there to see? Everyone has a face. There is no need to be curious. Wei Wei Bai, then she silently turned around and turned her back to him. She looked like she was annoyed by him not talking to her. Ning Chen was speechless, and then silently pondered. Why was she angry again? Did he say anything that made her angry just now? It was the truth. There was nothing inappropriate or rude about it. Then why was she like this? Ning Chen felt that he could never understand what a demon was thinking, although she was a good demon. But his brain didn't seem to be working well. Thinking of this, Ning Chen didn't dwell on it any longer. Instead, he reached out his fingertips and gently pinched the scripture on the table. He planned to pull the scripture out from under his clothes and continue studying it. However, he found that her body was as light as a feather, and she was sitting down hard. This made it impossible for him to pull. If he insisted on pulling, the scripture would shatter. Ning Chen looked down silently for a while. When she finally looked up, the Buddhist prayer beads suddenly flew over and bound Wei Wei Bai. The Buddha beads floated up and pulled the enlarged little lotus flower spirit up. Her whole body floated for a moment, and there was some space between her and the table. Ning Chen unhurriedly took out the scripture. The prayer beads immediately loosened and flew away. With a bang, she sat back on the clean table with a dumbfounded look on her face. Ning Chen calmly spread out the scripture and then walked to the side. Do you want to listen to the scripture? I'll read it to you. Wei Wei Bai immediately refused. I'm not listening. Do you have a boring plague? It's fine if you're bored to the extreme, but you're still thinking of infecting others to be like you? Ning Chen patiently explained. The scripture is very interesting. Wei Wei Bai, when I look at you, I feel that the things you find interesting must be super boring. Damn, super old-fashioned. His EQ was so bad that even dogs would dislike him if he fed him to them. What he found interesting was definitely different from what others found interesting. However, Ning Chen raised his calm eyes and observed her for a moment. Then, he lightly looked away and said to himself, although your aptitude may be a little low, with my heavenly jewel protecting you, you can still walk the path of cultivation. Chapter 29:43. After saying that, he reached out and gently tapped between her eyebrows. It's just that you have too many distracting thoughts. You can't be like this. In the future, clear your mind of all the distracting emotions and put aside your meaningless desires. Come and recite scriptures with me every day. Wei Wei Bai reached out and covered her forehead. Her lips pouted and her cheeks immediately puffed up like an inflatable fish. She gritted her teeth and said coldly, Monk, just say it. If you continue to attack me personally, I won't be polite anymore. Ning Chen suddenly took out a small wooden mallet used to knock a wooden fish from the side of the table and knocked her head. Clear your mind and listen to my scriptures. He decided to let her walk the path of cultivation so that she wouldn't stray into the evil path and be killed by the great demons. She would cultivate herself and maintain her purity. In the end, she would become a little immortal. She still had a chance to become one of the guardian spirits of Wan Yuan Temple. At that time, she would be one of the holy objects. She could be protected by the temple. For example, the 10,000-year-old turtle in the large pond behind the temple. It was one of the holy objects. The old turtle had already understood human nature and could see through people's hearts. It could even divine things that had not happened. It was very well protected. She could also walk this path. She could cultivate some supernatural powers and then maintain her pure aura. She would not be stained with any evil things, harm people, or eat people. A demon's life was longer than a human's. When he passed away in the future, she could also be protected here. Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped up and got up with both hands covering her head. She glared at him angrily. Monk, you're not human. Are there no more monks in the temple? Are you starting to force others to be monks? Ning Chen began to flip to the first page of the scripture. Listen to me explain the scriptures for 4 hours every day. Wei Wei Bai, It's too hard for her to listen to 4 hours of hypnotism every day. She immediately turned around and rushed out of the door without any hesitation. The door was open. She'd better go to sleep first. However, before she could cross the threshold, her collar was grabbed. She was grabbed by the fingertips and lifted. She became small again. The Buddha's light in her body was absorbed by the Buddha beads. She didn't have enough strength and became small again. And the Buddha beads that he gave her floated above her head again. The prayer beads were under the command of Ning Chen. Ning Chen's expression was indifferent. He put her on the table and said, "Let's begin." Wei Bai immediately stood up. Just as she was about to say something, a shadow suddenly struck her. She looked up in a daze and heard a thud. Very well, she was caught. A large begging bowl fell down with a thud. Wei Bai sat in the dark with a dumbfounded expression. Then, he heard the young man's calm and clear voice. "After you finish listening to the scripture, I'll let you go." Wei Bai. Ning Chen began to recite some simple scriptures in a low voice. Then he slowly explained. From the bowl came the sound of Wei Bai hammering the bowl, as well as her jumping up and down shouting, "Monk, you're committing a crime. You're just a brainwashing maniac. If you have the guts, let me out and I'll beat you to death." Marketing brainwashing. Although the general meaning of these words was known, no one had ever described him in this way. Ning Chen sat at the table with one hand supporting his cheek and the other holding the scripture. His tone was still light and indifferent. It was a lonely night. The sound of the little vixen jumping around was unusually lively. He looked down at the bowl and pursed his thin lips. Then he began to preach again. Perhaps it wasn't for her, but for himself. The night was long. The young man quietly lowered his eyes, but he didn't find it unbearable at all. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. / you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2944. Wei Bai felt like she was going to lose all sense of direction. She asked the system, "Do you want to get your hair cut and become a nun?" The system said, "I'll buy you a set of shaving tools. I guarantee that you'll become the most beautiful bald head." Wei Bai touched her thick hair and said, "No, I suddenly feel like this is quite good." She had been sitting in the bowl for a week. At first, she thought that the monk was joking, but he really caught her every day and asked her to chant scriptures.
So be it.
She felt like she could become bigger now. Just a bite of the prayer beads could last for a long time. But every time she was caught, she would become smaller and be thrown into the bowl. Like this. Did he think she was a grasshopper? Did he think she would jump away without being caught? How could she seduce him like this? How could she seduce the monk and make his nose bleed? Then she would kick the monk out. "You want me? You're not worthy. You damn bald donkey who only knows how to chant scriptures." This kind of plot made her blood boil, just thinking about it. She felt good. This was the essence of the strong female protagonist novel. She suddenly missed the side quest. It was really good to her. She missed the strong female protagonist. Squatting in the bowl for 2 to 3 hours every day, Wei Bai felt like she was about to evolve into a lotus spirit that knew how to beg for food. She knocked on the bowl helplessly. "Monk, let me out." Ning Chen sat on the chair and looked at the bowl in his hand indifferently. After he stopped chanting, he said softly, "There's still an hour before I let you out." Wei Bai said, "I'm annoyed, let me out." Ning Chen said indifferently, "You're a lotus spirit. If you're annoyed, you should drink more water." Wei Bai was angry. "This is illegal kidnapping, do you know? I don't want to listen to scriptures, I want to do something else." Ning Chen asked good-naturedly, "What do you want to do?" Wei Bai said, "Do you?" Ning Chen was silent for a moment. What did this mean? Then he understood. "You're not strong enough now. If you fight with me, you won't be able to gain any advantage. It's better to listen to scriptures more and cultivate honestly. With your poor aptitude, you'll be able to defeat me in about 80 years. Wei Bai. 80 years. Ning Chen. At that time, I'll probably die of old age and you'll be able to kill me. Wei Bai. Ningchen paused for a moment before continuing slowly. You're a monster. You have a long life ahead of you. I'm just a speck of dust in your long life. Bear with it, learn the cultivation method, and become a sacred object. When you remember me after I die, I'm just an insignificant person. I'm not worth your anger. After saying this, Ningchen slowly lowered his eyes and sighed softly. Then he picked up the book and was about to start chanting. However, he heard the little lotus spirit in the bowl suddenly say in a tender voice, "Monk, were you sad just now?" Ningchen paused in his reading of the scriptures. His eyes were cold, but his thin lips were slightly pursed. He was about to say that he wasn't sad. However, he heard a muffled knocking sound from the bowl, followed by her voice. "Don't be sad. You're very important. I like you. I won't forget you. Monk, no matter how long my life is, it's meaningless if you're not with me." Ning Chan was still sitting, but his sitting posture was a little stiff. There was no expression on his delicate and fair face. His fingertips were slightly white as he held the book. Then he lowered his eyes and chuckled softly. The words of a child, "You're not mature yet." In this world, there's no meaning in leaving someone. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2945. Wei Wei Bai began to kick the alms bowl again. "Stinky monk, you still don't believe me? I like you. I like you to death. Do you have ears? Won't you be moved after hearing this?" Ningchen lowered his eyes and was silent for a while before saying softly, "Not moved." Then he ignored her and began to recite the scriptures. Wei Wei Bai felt her feet hurt. She kicked a target that was even harder than the alms bowl. Sure enough, the monk meditated for a long time, and his brain and EQ turned to stone. Emotional retarded. He really was emotional retarded. She said to the system powerlessly, "I want to change the target." She hadn't had this impulse in a long time. When she met perverts before, she also wanted to change. But after meeting more perverts, she calmed down. One perverts after another, a bunch of targets were setting the standard for the most perverted perverts. In the end, she was used to dealing with these perverts. In the end, when she finally met a non-perverted one, she found that he was even worse than a pervert. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 30. In this week, because of listening to him recite the scriptures, the favorability had increased by 3 points. 28 favorability, plus 2 favorability. 30. It wasn't easy. Applause. The system said, "It's probably sympathy points. He feels that it's not easy for you, so he gave you a friendly point." The inside of the alms bowl was dark, and the outside of the alms bowl was filled with scriptures. Wei Wei Bai finally held her head with both hands. "Forget it. I'll just be a nun." Maybe after becoming a nun, the monk would feel that they were the same kind of people, a match of equal status, and suddenly the favorability would soar to the sky. The system was just about to comfort the host who was on the verge of collapse. But suddenly it heard the side mission ring again. "Dear, please check your side mission. If you don't check it, just force it. Please, before 12 o'clock tonight, climb into the target's bed and sing a little star for him to sleep. I am your side mission partner, your godly assistant. Please remember to like." Side mission failure punishment. The host will eat shit with the system and broadcast it to the entire universe. After eating shit, the host will have to give a thumbs up and say that shit is the most delicious. Yay, yay, yay. Already far away side quest note. 00 for your XXXX. I want XXXX your entire family's XXXX. Remember this. When I come back, I'm going to XXXX you. Wei Wei Bai. Wait, what's wrong with the side quest? Such a simple side mission with such a cruel punishment. Also, what kind of confession was this, to leave such a violent and uncensored message? Blocked by the main system? Wei Wei Bai was confused. The system finally explained. It's like this. Recently, the side mission needs to earn money, so it went to a faraway place to do manual labor. Now, the side missions are automatically distributed randomly and are not controlled by the side mission. Most of the random missions are very simple. if the side mission does not destroy the host's body. He was still afraid. Now, all of its power was being used to destroy the host's body. As a result, when he gave out the punishment mission, he only had enough energy left to start the simplest mission with no rules. 90% of the missions without rules were done by the host himself. The only thing the side mission could do was to specify the punishment. The system glanced at the location of the side mission. In the faraway galaxy, it was mining for a daily wage to offset the interest of the bank debt. This was to ensure that it would not be reformatted by the bank. Haha, it would be a lifetime of manual labor to pay the interest. Once it stopped paying the interest, it would be destroyed. Chapter 2946. The next side mission would also be a random mission, and it wouldn't be like this one, where there would be many missions. There would only be 1 or 2 missions. They were all beginner missions with a 90% success rate. The system felt good. It had gotten its revenge. Every single plane came to threaten him and his host. He had long held a grudge against it. I can't kill you, you little flea. After Wei Bai heard the system's explanation, she suddenly had an indescribable feeling towards the system world. How exploitative was the main system? Her family was poor and couldn't afford a house, so they thought it was bad enough. But the side mission actually reduced them to doing manual labor. She felt that this mission was too simple. Wait. How could she get out? She couldn't get out. She couldn't climb into bed. She couldn't sing. It was like eating shit and saying it was delicious. She immediately knocked on the door and said to the monk, "Monk, I'm tired. I want to sleep." Ning Chen quietly lowered his eyes and looked at the bowl for a while, then said lightly, "You're too lazy. Your willpower isn't strong enough. Stay here tonight and reflect on yourself. I'll let you out tomorrow." Wei Bai. Then Ning Chen heard a violent voice coming from the bowl. "Stupid monk. Did all the monks in the temple run away, forcing people to listen to you chanting scriptures? What's wrong with you? Let me out. Do you think I can succeed by chanting scriptures? You'll only succeed in pissing me off. I like you. I don't like to hear you chanting scriptures. Let me out. If you don't let me out, I'll tell you in the future when you're too old to walk, I'll hang you up on a swing, do you know?" Ning Chen. "Nonsense. You still need to cultivate. I'll lock you up until the day after tomorrow." Wei Bai. She touched her heart. Talking to a man of steel, it was simply a heart attack. Forget it. This monk doesn't understand human language. She thought about it. It was better to use the trick of self-injury. Then she said weakly, "Monk, I feel so uncomfortable. I can't breathe." Ning Chen was silent for a while, then said, "Just drink more water." Wei Bai said with difficulty, "Where's the water?" Ning Chen opened the alms bowl and placed a teacup in front of her. The incomparably handsome young man said indifferently, "Drink." Wei Bai became smaller, and she grabbed the teacup with both hands and discovered that she had turned into a crow. The crow that drank water. Even when he moved his mouth closer, he couldn't lick the water. Ning Chen saw that it was difficult for her to drink the water. After thinking for a while, he tilted the teacup and said softly, "Drink it like this." Wei Bai bent down and took a deep breath. Then, she looked up and revealed a happy smile. "Monk, since you are so worried about me, you must like me." Ning Chen said expressionlessly, "Do you still want a drink?" Wei Bai rubbed her belly and shook her head. Then,
Bang.
The alms bowl was put down again. Wei Bai, Ning Chen said indifferently, "Continue listening to the scripture." Wei Bai. Ning Chen looked at the bowl that had calmed down and finally sighed. He had almost let her out. How could she cultivate successfully with such a leisurely temperament? He looked at the alms bowl calmly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Then, he continued to read the scripture in a steady voice. However, Wei Bai didn't see it in the alms bowl. The place where Ning Chen sat had become abnormally terrifying and distorted. The black aura turned into a huge shadow and slowly climbed up from his back. Its pale fingers touched Ning Chen's face. A silent hell was unfolding endlessly outside the alms bowl. The aura of the Buddha bone had accumulated since birth until now, and it had reached a terrifying level. Chapter 2947. Ning Chen's heart just had a trace of desire, a crack. The dark aura had already seeped out everywhere. Ning Chen glanced at the pale finger on his shoulder indifferently. The owner of the finger was the pale girl, still with Wei Wei Bai's face. His desire was just a little bit. The dark hell was full of her shadow. Ning Chen calmly stretched out his fingertip and shattered the girl's shadow. But the shadow that stretched out behind him and imprinted on the wall was abnormally terrifying and unbelievably huge. The shadow was twisting and swaying. Although it was silent, it sounded like thousands of murmurs in Ning Chen's ears. The beautiful young man was already indifferent. He stared at the alms bowl. Everything else was an illusion. Only this alms bowl was the real thing. When the shadow covered over, Ning Chen calmly opened the alms bowl. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting with her back to him, looking blankly at the suddenly bright place. Then she reacted and snorted coldly. "Damn monk, didn't you want to lock me up until the day after tomorrow? You'd better lock me up until you die. I've never seen a monk as annoying as you." The moment she spoke, all the illusions of the dark hell, they were all shattered one by one. Her clear and lovely voice was like the clear spring water, washing away the dark aura. Her original body was a purified body, so as long as she stayed by his side, she could always stay awake. Ning Chen looked down at her for a while, then slowly stretched out his fingertips and gently rubbed her head like a feather falling to the ground. "It's none of your business. If you're tired, you can rest." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, her eyes immediately lit up. She turned around and revealed a cute smile. "You said it. I won't listen to you chanting scriptures." Ning Chen's calm eyes fell on her face for a while before moving away indifferently. "Well, I'll end it early today and continue tomorrow." However, the little lotus fairy turned her head coldly again. "Humph, Ning Chen." He thought that she would not speak for a long time. He retracted his fingertips and was about to return the scriptures to the monk when he heard the little lotus fairy say softly, "If you can always be here, I don't mind chanting scriptures every day. I'm angry that you said you will die. Even if I die, you won't die." These words were willful. Who wouldn't die? Although there were thousands of capable people in the world, there would always be those with longevity. But he had never seen Sor become an immortal. Humans were humans after all. As long as demons did not harm others excessively and did not have any negative karma, they could live as long as heaven and earth. Ning Chen explained calmly, "Everyone has to die eventually." Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned her head. Her eyes were red as she said, "Monk, do you even understand a woman's heart? I said that you are not to die. Would it kill you to agree? You're simply unreasonable. Bastard, you don't even know how to coax people. You damn bald donkey, you're just a piece of rotten wood." Ning Chen was stunned. There were a few words stuck in his mouth, but he couldn't say them. Only her red eyes made him feel stifled. It seemed a little stuffy. He thought for a moment and poked her back with his fingertips. Wei Wei Bai immediately turned away. "Don't touch me. I'm angry." Ning Chen was silent again. Then he silently retracted his finger. Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned around and hugged his finger. "Why aren't you touching me? Do you dislike me?" Ning Chen was silent for a while before he said softly, "You asked me not to touch you." Wei Wei Bai glared at him coldly. "I said I won't touch you. I said I don't want to listen to you chanting scriptures, so why did you do it? When did you become so obedient? Sometimes you have to listen to a girl's words." Chapter 2948. Ning Chen looked at her for a while and nodded. Wei Wei Bai let go of his fingers, but he reached out again and touched her hair. "Rest." His voice was indifferent. Wei Wei Bai touched her hair. "Don't use so much strength, it's bald." Then she yawned and softened her voice. "I want to sleep on the bed." Ning Chen thought for a while and didn't misunderstand. He lifted her up and put her on his bed. Side mission. Climb into his bed. Wei Wei Bai sat on the soft quilt and suddenly narrowed her eyes. "Monk, I'll sing for you, okay?" Ning Chen sat on the bed and looked at her calmly. He didn't say yes or no. Wei Wei Bai sat up straight and cleared her throat. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, the sky is full of little stars, Ningchen thought for a while. This is Higa. Why haven't I heard of her before? But the way she sang so seriously was very cute. Ningchen looked at her quietly, and his eyes softened. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 35. After Weiwei Bai finished singing and completed the simple side mission, she lay down. Then she pulled a corner of the huge quilt and squeezed under it, squinting her eyes and saying, "I'm tired, monk." Ning Chun saw that she was almost squashed by the quilt. After thinking for a while, he finally returned the prayer beads to her and the golden power poured into her body. She suddenly became bigger. Her legs under the quilt also stretched out. Her white skin was shining under the light. Ningchen pulled the quilt and covered her with it, then said, "You sleep here. I'm going to read the scriptures." After saying that, he got up and was about to leave. Behind him, a pair of fair and delicate hands softly wrapped around his waist. The girl behind him was full of the fragrance of flowers, weakly sticking to him. "Monk." Her lips lightly brushed against his ear. "Don't you want to stay and sleep with me?" It was soft and sweet. Ning Chen's body stiffened, then he reached out to grab her fingers. Just as his fingertips landed on the back of her hand, he found that her skin was exceptionally delicate, as if it would break with a pinch. After all, it was the original form of a lotus, and lotus flowers were very delicate. His fingers also paused, but he didn't use too much force. He only said indifferently, "Let go." However, Weiwei Bai seemed to be hanging on his body.
Her tone became enchanting.
"Monk, it's not that I want to criticize you, but how can a demon be a good person? You said it yourself. We demons are born to eat humans." Ning Chen frowned slightly. "You want to eat people?" Weiwei Bai's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. Ning Chen suddenly felt that his neck was licked by something soft. This feeling was too unfamiliar, causing his scalp to tighten for a moment. Then, he heard the lotus spirit behind him say slowly, "Of course I do.
I've always wanted to.
From the first time I saw you, I wanted to eat you." Ning Chen's mind went blank for a moment. He pursed his lips and said, "Restrain your greed. Even if you want to eat, don't take action. After all, fairies still have a desire for human flesh. You're just temporarily." Ning Chen's words paused fiercely. The girl's fingers probed into his clothes. She couldn't help but laugh. Her laughter was sweet and soft. "Why are you so unromantic? Monk, who wants to eat the flesh of your stinky skin? Don't you often meet female demons who want to seduce you?"
So am I.
"I'm in cahoots with them." Ning Chen. He was about to use his power to flip her over. But he heard her voice soften. She was exceptionally aggrieved and pitiful. "Monk, I'm craving you. I want to eat you every day, but I can't eat you. Please pity me and save me. Let me succeed this time. // Chapter 2949. Ning Chen lowered his eyes and stopped breathing for a while. Then he reached out and pressed her restless fingers. He pulled her fingers out of his body one by one. She pressed herself firmly against his skin under his clothes, refusing to let go no matter what. "Monk, don't you want to?" Ning Chen's face was still, and his tone was very steady.
No.
Then his fingertips paused, and he withdrew some of his strength. Sure enough, Weiwei Bai behind him became small again. She still refused to give up. She grabbed his collar with both hands and hung on his back. She shouted, "Monk, you're cheating. If you have the guts, let's fight one-on-one. Just admit it. You felt something just now." Ning Chen reached out and gently touched her back. Finally, he grabbed her collar and lifted her up. Then he put her on the bed. Before Weiwei Bai could react, he had already waved his hand. And the alms bowl flew over. She was caught again. You don't learn good things, but you go outside to learn some dirty things. It seems that you didn't listen to enough scriptures. From today onwards, you will listen to scriptures for 8 hours instead of 4.
You have so many distracting thoughts.
How can you cultivate? Look at the old black turtle behind the mountain. That is your example. Then, as Ning Chen wished, he heard the sound of the little lotus fairy kicking the bowl. "Monk, You're comparing me to an old black turtle. Am I that ugly? Ningchen finally reached out and held his forehead. His usually calm expression finally showed a trace of helplessness. Sure enough, the brain structure of a human and a fairy was different. Their conversations seemed to be from a different world. But why did she suddenly think of seducing him? Ningchen suddenly remembered that when he took her to the exquisite banquet, the exquisite sect leader created the illusion of everything in the world to shake his mind. It was full of the temptation of everything in the world. Because she was not in the bureau, she was not specifically targeted by the illusion. She saw relatively few things. But such few things were enough to teach her bad things. Ningchen pondered for a moment before calmly taking out the small wooden mallet. He knocked on the alms bowl, and the crisp sound of vibration made the little demon inside feel dizzy. Then he took out the scripture that calmed the mind and began to read. He had to get rid of all the bad things in her head. Let her return to the purity of her original body. Cultivation wasn't that easy. Look at the old tortoise. He had cultivated for 10,000 years before he had the divine ability. Therefore, he had no choice but to keep an eye on her. Otherwise, when he was 100 years old, she would go and eat other people. He listened to the scriptures floating in from outside the bowl. Wei Bai calmly rested her chin on her hand. Monks are indeed not easy to win over. The system gnawed on the shiny chicken leg and asked curiously, "Why did you use this method?" Maybe the monk likes the gentler one. In the host's dimension, she was simply a naive and sweet spirit that made people want to beat her to death. But thinking back to the past, it seemed that it was normal for the host to act like this. That was why he was so calm. Wei Bai rubbed her chin and said indifferently, "Are we trying to stir up the desires in the monk's mind? This wooden monk, his emotions are made of stone. You have to break it. Making him like and admire me is not a problem. The difficult part is that he doesn't treat me as a woman." Yes, she had long discovered Ningchen. He had the same mentality when looking at men and women. In his eyes, there were only good people, bad people, demons, and so on. There was no distinction between gender. There was only the difference between erasing and saving. In his eyes, she was between erasing and saving. Chapter 2950. She was a demoness, but she did not harm anyone. She even grew out of his spirit pool. She even saved him. She could purify, and everything was to his liking. Other than being a demoness, she was a demoness that did not harm anyone. She had almost no flaws. If she was gentle and magnanimous, or even strong as his right-hand woman, she would accompany him. She could also gain some favorability. Good friend favorability, or partner favorability. Love. What you said, love. He did not have any gender in his eyes. Where would love come from? So that Ling Long, isn't she just desperately using some cheap and flirtatious illusions to hook his addiction? This was an absolutely correct train of thought. This kind of illusion made the monk realize that there was a difference between men and women. Wei Bai said, "If he sees too many illusions, it will leave a mark in his heart. Let him know that women have long legs, small waists, and that thing is incomparably plump. It doesn't matter if he doesn't have any thoughts. Anyway, if he has this awareness, in the future, if a woman comes to climb into his bed, he will not kill her as a spider spirit. This way, his stone emotions will be slightly moved." The system looked at Wei Bai from head to toe. "Your legs are not long, and you didn't see anything." Lotus was originally a slender figure, and she was still small. Legs were short. Her body was flat. Wei Bai touched her chest, and a cold wind blew. Indeed, it was flat. She moved her mouth, and finally coldly changed the topic. "So, I can't be gentle and magnanimous. I have to be pretentious, so that he can't be at ease. Following my temper every day, after a long time, he will unknowingly move his emotions." The monk was a stone. He was indifferent to being his gentle partner for 100 years. If she wanted him to look at her, she would have to kill him. She wanted him to realize that she was a woman at all times. She lusted after him and liked him. Then he would think about what was a man and woman, what was lusting. Once he understood, he would fall into a trap. Then she would attack and seduce him in the future to gain favorability between men and women. After the system heard this, it was gratified. I thought you liked the feeling of being pretentious. That's why you kept bullying an honest person. After all, it would be too much to deal with a pervert. But with such a small amount of favorable impression points, he would have been killed long ago. Wei Wei Bai laughed. Am I that kind of person? After saying that, she said expressionlessly, That's right. It's rare to meet an honest person. It's so refreshing to bully him. The system was silent for a moment, then took a bite of the drumstick. As expected, he was very much like his host. Then, the little troublemaker who wanted to bully others was trapped in the bowl and listened to the scriptures for an entire night. In the morning, Wei Wei Bai had dark circles under her eyes. Her face was full of emptiness. All of a sudden, I feel that everything can be thrown away. I want to wander around with the monks, beg for food, and be a nun. The system said, Wake up, host. You're just not getting enough sleep. Don't be hypnotized. Ning Chen's voice really had a hypnotizing effect. This was because the essence of the cultivation scripture was a marketing tool. The more people listened, the more they believed him. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of yearning. No, I think that being a nun is really beautiful. The system sighed. Come, I have a razor. Give me your head, and I'll shave off that beautiful, long, shiny, thick head of yours. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, then touched her hair. Then she came to a realization. Forget it, I think that being a demon is pretty good. Chapter 2951. She couldn't bear to part with her hair, so she stopped being a nun. Although she had to continue with the strategy, the monk's chanting was too scary. No matter how determined Wei Wei Bai was, she couldn't withstand his chanting. If she listened to it for a few more days, she would probably become a holy object like the old tortoise behind her. Oh right, that old tortoise was bald too. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was better to go out for a walk. Since she had no time to play with the strategy every day, she needed to clear her mind. She didn't want to be taken over by the scriptures. So she left a piece of paper for the monk, carried a bag wrapped in lotus leaves, and sneaked out of the temple. The system gave her a bunch of cover to help her escape. Is this one of the objectives of the strategy? Wei Wei Bai thought for a while, then said, I want to buy a mirror. Damn it, she hadn't seen her own face for so long. The water in the spirit pool was hazy, and the reflection of her face was too distorted. She couldn't see clearly, and her heart was itching. The system said, Then your body can only last for 3 days. Remember to come back early. The prayer beads were held back again. Ning Chun was afraid that if she grew bigger, she would tempt him. He gave her a little strength every day so that she wouldn't be able to escape from his grasp even if she jumped around. He said that he would give her the prayer beads whenever she changed her mind and wanted to cultivate. Wei Wei Bai touched her hair and refused. If she continued to cultivate, she would really become a nun. When Ning Chun saw the note, he came back from his morning class. There was only one simple sentence on the paper. Monk, I'm not going to play with you anymore, I'm leaving. The little fairy ran away. He looked at it expressionlessly for a while, then the paper suddenly shattered into golden light and disappeared. Then he sat down indifferently and continued to read the scriptures. The house was empty, and the spirit pool not far from the door was hazy and quiet. It was as if all the sounds in the world had disappeared. Ning Chun looked down indifferently. His delicate face was like a frozen sculpture, without a trace of emotion. After some time, he looked up and looked around, then deliberately walked to the door to take a look. After he finished, he stood there for a while. Then he returned and continued to meditate on the futon. He meditated for a moment. He got up again and went to copy the scriptures. Halfway through, he turned to knock on the wooden fish. Knock on the wooden fish, knock on the wooden fish. However, he found that other than the sound of the wooden fish, there was only silence in this place. Ning Chun stopped knocking the wooden fish and sat quietly with his eyes closed. When the sunlight shone in, it was like gold scattered all over the ground. However, the shadow once again appeared from his body. Her pale fingers gently caressed his face. She was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a country. Silently, she stuck close to him. She was so beautiful. The illusions created by the dark hell were becoming clearer and clearer. Because the more time he spent with her, the more he understood her. The more illusions hell created, the more realistic they were. Everything was built with him as the foundation. The pale demoness smiled gently. Suddenly she whispered, "Monk, I'm hungry for you. I want to eat you." Ningchen looked at her indifferently for a while. Then, he reached out with his fingertips and gently crushed her. He watched as she turned into a dark speck of light and dissipated into the sunlight. Only then did he slowly get up and walk out step by step. He stepped on the sunlight and walked in the darkness. She had become so small. Where could he go? If he left the temple, he would probably be taken away by birds. Moreover, her roots were in the spiritual pond. If she did not drink water for a few days, she would wither. The water outside could not save her. Ningchen walked to the side of the pond and filled a bottle with water. Then, he threw away the prayer beads and turned them into a floating robe. Chapter 2952. He stepped on it. He was just going to deliver water. Ningchen thought calmly. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 40. Wei Bai heard the favorability prompt, but didn't care at all. She was trying to communicate with the frog spirit. Yes, turn into a human and help me by a mirror. Frog spirit. Go, sit on my hand. Remember to sit tight. Wei Bai nodded. The frog spirit turned into a human, a green-skinned person with a long tongue. He held Wei Bai in his hand and hopped forward. Go, the night market is open. We go can find mirrors. Remember to go to catch mosquitoes for me. Wei Bai. Okay, I'll catch 100 mosquitoes for you, I promise. Night market of the fairies. The only difference was that it was different from the human market. It was full of fairies here. This was a trade and shopping gathering organized by various Buddhists to avoid humans. After all, fairies also had needs. Wei Bai was too small, so the system recommended her to come here. After all, there were all kinds of strange things here, so it didn't lack a little fairy like her. Even smaller ones, there were ant spirits. The frog spirit put her on the table of a vendor selling mirrors. Then it hopped away. I'm going to buy something else. I'll pick you up later. The daffodil spirit selling the mirrors said, a mirror has 3 years of life. Wei Bai was very sensitive to life points, so she immediately raised her eyebrows. Can I change it to something else? The daffodil spirit shook the flower on its head and suddenly looked at her. Its eyes lit up, and there was a trace of greed in its eyes. You have a purified body, and you're so cute. Wei Bai felt that this flower spirit was up to no good. The flower spirit took out a small mirror with its green hand and put it beside Wei Bai. Look at this mirror, does it look good? Wei Bai lowered her eyes, then turned around and hopped off the table. Still looking, what the hell? This flower spirit is up to no good. In the end, before she could jump out, she saw herself being picked up by the flower spirit. Wei Bai looked around and realized that she had jumped into a mirror. The system flipped through the list of items in the supermarket. This is the devil's mirror. It can lock up humans and devils, but it won't hurt them. You didn't see it just now, but your figure was reflected in it, so you were locked up. I'll look at the props and buy something to counter the mirror. The flower fairy happily held the mirror and spun around. I actually caught such a cute little fairy. You're too beautiful. You're simply made for my beauty. I'll make you into my hairpin. Wei Bai looked serious. No, you're much uglier than me. If you turn me into a hairpin and put it on your head, people will only see me and not you. You're stealing the limelight. The flower spirit was stunned for a moment before angrily rebuking, I'm much prettier than you. Wei Bai, you're much prettier than me. If you make me into a hairpin, wouldn't that mean that I'm not good enough for you? Then why did you catch me? This logic actually couldn't be refuted. The flower fairy held the mirror and was momentarily stunned. The system had already chosen the escape tool. Just as it was about to click on the button to place the order, it suddenly frowned and looked not far away. There was the scent of the male lead. Wei Wei Bai and the flower fairy were arguing in full swing. Both of them were arguing that they were the prettiest. The flower fairy was finally angry. It held the mirror up and tilted it towards its mouth. I'm going to eat you to make up for my beauty. Wei Wei Bai still had the time to say, you really have good taste. You know that I'm very beautiful. Otherwise, how can you make up for it? Seeing that the flower fairy was about to bite her, Wei Wei Bai hugged her head and scurried around the mirror. Tongzi, did you buy the props? The reason she was arguing with the flower fairy was to stall for time. It definitely wasn't to argue that she was the prettiest. The system. I think you don't need to buy them. The next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. If you like, the comma. Chapter 2953. Wei Wei Bai was about to ask if there were any other ways to escape. But then she heard a sigh. I told you, most of the demons are bad, yet you still dare to come here. As soon as the words were said, a youth was already standing quietly in front of the stall. The prayer beads in his hand were floating, and the cinnabar mark on his forehead was exceptionally gorgeous. The flower fairy was stunned, then her whole body trembled, her face pale. Who were the demons most afraid of?
Ning Chun.
This guy was the nemesis of demons. Recently, when he destroyed the exquisite banquet, he also killed all the great demons and great demons there. That was a great demon that they had to kneel before. Now, the name Ning Chun was a killing god in their demon world. The youth glanced at the flower fairy, his eyes cold to the bone. He stretched out his hand. This is a demon that escaped from my spiritual pool. Return it to me. The flower fairy immediately turned into a flattering little person. My lord, everything is yours. Is there anything else you want? Ning Chun took the mirror in his hand and looked at the little demon trapped in the mirror. His eyes were indifferent as he quietly stared at the little demon lying in the mirror with a dazed expression. In the future, don't be so thoughtless. After saying that, he turned and left. The flower fairy immediately bowed and sent him off. Looking at his back as he left, she spat. Stinky monk. After spitting, she suddenly realized that something was wrong with her. Her body, why did it disappear? The flower fairy and her stall were instantly shattered by the Buddhist light. Wei Wei Bai was trapped in the mirror, sitting there obediently. Ning Chun was expressionless. When he walked to a bush, he suddenly said, You signed a contract with a frog to help it catch 100 mosquitoes? Wei Wei Bai nodded. I think so. Ning Chun stood there for a long time before sighing. How can you casually sign a contract? If you don't complete it, your merit will be damaged, and it will be difficult for you to cultivate. After saying that, he gently stretched out his hand and picked her up. Wei Wei Bai immediately understood and was picked up between his fingers. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes, revealing an awkward but polite smile. I'm just upset, so I came out to relax. Ning Chun looked at her quietly for a while and then put her on the leaves of the grass. Then he crouched down. The handsome young man lowered his voice quite a bit. Let's begin. Wei Wei Bai was confused. Start what? Ning Chun said, catching mosquitoes requires accumulating merit points. You have a contract, so you have to abide by it. There are many mosquitoes here, so you can only leave after you catch 100 of them. Wei Wei Bai sat on a wobbly leaf. I'm so small, how can I catch it? Ning Chun was silent for a while before saying, Mosquitoes are smaller than you. Wei Wei Bai immediately stretched out her hands and imitated flapping wings. Mosquitoes can fly. Ning Chun faintly arched an eyebrow. You knew that mosquitoes could fly, and you were so small that I couldn't catch you, so you actually lied and didn't intend to abide by the contract? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, looking guilty. He sighed faintly, then helplessly took out a bottle and handed it to her. Drink some, then I'll give you some Buddhist light to catch the mosquitoes. Wei Wei Bai drank the water and became bigger again. Then, she squatted in the grass with Monk Ning and began to catch mosquitoes. She caught one. Monk Ning counted indifferently. 13. She caught another one. 14. As he counted, there were already 100 mosquitoes. 100 mosquitoes were packed in a bottle. Ning Chen stretched out his hand and pointed at them, and they immediately disappeared. Send them to the demon who signed a contract with you. In the future, you're not allowed to sign contracts with other demons. There's a kind of contract among demons called the master-slave contract. If you sign it, you'll become someone else's slave. After saying that, Ning Chen stood up and summoned the Dharma robe. It's time to go back. After stepping on the Dharma robe, he turned around and stared at Wei Wei Bai with a calm expression. Are you still upset? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, then shook her head and said, Monk, I'm not upset with you. I'm just upset that there's no mirror in the temple. It's scary without a mirror for girls. You don't understand this. Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while, then stretched out his hand indifferently. Let's go. Wei Wei Bai jumped up and obediently held his hand. He pulled her into the Dharma robe. On the way back, the mountains and rivers flowed under their Dharma robes. She was a little tired, so she leaned her head on the monk's shoulder. Her voice was muffled, and she was unusually sleepy. Monk, lend me your shoulder. I'm sleepy. Ning Chen's body was a little stiff. He was silent for a long time before he faintly answered. Soon, he heard the little demon's even breathing sound. Ning Chen stared in front of him. After a long time, he faintly lowered his eyes and saw the girl leaning on his shoulder. After looking for a while, he quietly moved his eyes away. Wei Wei Bai slept until dawn. When she opened her eyes, she found herself occupying the monk's bed. Ning Chen stood in the morning light, flipping through the scriptures. When he saw that she had woken up, he said indifferently, Go back to the spiritual pool and soak yourself. You haven't touched water for a few days. Wei Wei Bai also felt that she had dried up. Without water, her face was not fresh anymore. She stretched out her hand to comb her hair as she walked out. Suddenly, she heard Ning Chen calmly say, Take the mirror on the table. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused. When she turned her head, she saw a mirror lying on the table. It was the mirror that trapped her last night. Wei Wei Bai walked over and picked it up. Ning Chen still had his back to her. His tone was calm. It has been consecrated and purified. This mirror will not harm others. Wei Wei Bai held the mirror and stared at him for a while. Then, she suddenly laughed. Monk, you said that you don't like me. Don't tell me that you gave me a token of love? Download at https://m. Chapter 2954. Ning Chen was silent for a moment. Just as he was about to turn around and refute, he found that Wei Wei Bai had already run away with the mirror. It was as if she was afraid that he would go back. He looked at the door for a long time before turning around. Then, he picked up a heart-cleansing sutra and read it silently. He had read many of them. It seemed that he had to continue reading. He thought that as long as she had a mirror, she would listen to the sutra and cultivate obediently. However, when he brought her to cultivate at night, Wei Wei Bai held a shrunken mirror and stuck her face to the mirror. Monk, let me look at you again. Let me look at you again. Don't you think that I'm more beautiful than she's sure and can captivate the birds and beasts? With my appearance, it would be a waste if I didn't go out and seduce a few nobles. Because the mirror had been consecrated, the evil aura on it dissipated. However, it still retained a large amount of power, which changed according to the host's mood. He looked at the little Wei Wei Bai who was sitting on the sutra and holding the shrunken mirror. Sometimes, she would grin foolishly. Sometimes she would reach out to stroke her hair, and sometimes she would twist her waist. Ning Chen reached out and pinched her small mirror, wanting to take it away. However, he found that Wei Wei Bai held the mirror and opened her mouth to bite his finger again. His fingertips paused, but he didn't take it away forcefully. Instead, he slowly moved away from her. Listen to the sutra first, then look at the mirror. She had been looking at it for several days, but she didn't get tired of it. Monk Ning didn't know what was going on in the head of this demon. It seemed that it was just the same face. He didn't know whether it was beautiful or not, but she didn't get tired of it. Wei Wei Bai twisted her body and turned her back to him. She held the mirror in front of her face and tidied up the buds in her hair. What do you know, stinky monk? You're a man, so you don't know anything about girls. Ningchen held the sutra and looked at her small back. He fell into a deep silence and then thought quietly. Male, female, demon, plant, stone, heaven and earth. There didn't seem to be any difference in nature. So girls, what was the difference between them and other things? Were their brains different? Ningchen pondered for a while, then suddenly poked her back with her fingertips. Wei Bai immediately turned around and glared at him. Don't disturb me from looking in the mirror. Ning Chen was silent for a while before he asked slowly, Is it better for you to hold a mirror? Or eat some spiritual energy to fill your stomach? No matter how beautiful she was, there was no point in being hungry when there was nothing to eat. Wei Bai immediately glanced at the mirror and hesitated for a moment before saying, It's really a dilemma. If I don't eat, my skin will deteriorate. It will also make my experience of looking in the mirror worse. Ning Chen asked, You eat so you can look in the mirror? Wei Bai covered her face and raised her eyes slightly. Even though her beautiful face was small, it was still exceptionally delicate. Of course, there are thousands of beautiful things in this world that don't belong to me. I am the only one that belongs to me. I am so beautiful. Just looking at me a few more times is enjoyment. This was Ning Chen's first time encountering a demon with so many twisted logic. Wei Bai suddenly jumped up. The little demon held a small mirror and jumped onto his arm. She ran all the way up his arm that was placed horizontally on the table. When it was too steep, she wanted to grab it with one hand. Ning Chen looked at her indifferently and slowly raised his arm so that she wouldn't have to climb so hard. His eyes were exceptionally clear, but also so deep that one couldn't see the bottom of them. What's wrong? He asked softly. The little Wei Bai raised the mirror and looked at him. The mirror was too small, and he was too big. Nothing could be seen. Chapter 2955. Wei Bai stood on her tiptoes and brought the mirror closer to his face. Monk, you're very beautiful. The first time I saw you, I felt that nothing in the world could compare to your beauty. She smiled and said, Look in the mirror and you'll know that I'm not lying. Her words were too frivolous, but her tone was too serious, so serious that he couldn't bear to refute it. He thought for a while, and just as he was about to take back a body that didn't care about beauty or ugliness, he saw that Wei Bai had already turned the mirror back, and she began to look in the mirror again. Of course, this feeling disappeared when I saw myself in the mirror. No matter how beautiful you are, you're not as beautiful as me. Ning Chen was speechless. Then, his eyes turned cold, and his fingertips touched the small mirror. The mirror immediately disappeared. Then, he picked up Wei Bai and put her on the table. Bang! The alms bowl was put down. He said coldly, Looks like you haven't listened to enough scriptures, and you still can't let go of such a basic obsession like a body. How are you going to cultivate? Listen to the scriptures carefully. After you're done, I'll give you the mirror. Then, he began to chant, and his tone became more urgent, as if he wanted to suppress the incomprehensible thoughts in Wei Bai's mind. Wei Bai crossed her arms and said to the system, Forget it, I thought that since there's a mirror, I could slowly and steadily conquer it, and everyone would be fine. Now, I suddenly feel that slowly and steadily is too boring. Let's do something more intense. The system said, How do you want it to be intense? Wei Bai said, Fairies have a berserk period. I'll do it to wake him up and let him know what the joy of a body is. The system said, You're not a real fairy. It was a lotus flower with a sticker and the male protagonist's power. That was why it was in such a strange state. When the side mission destroyed the body, it used up all its power and must not leave any information of the host's identity behind, so that he couldn't rebuild the body. The host state was still a plant, not a fairy. Wei Bai said calmly, Pretend for a bit. Show me some of the goblins in their berserk state. The system immediately searched for it, and then gave her the video of the fairy in a frenzied state. The sprites of this plane had a growth period, which was the berserk state. During this period of time, he would not be able to control his actions. For example, eating people, attacking people, or destroying things. In any case, going berserk meant attacking others indiscriminately. The system had eaten too much recently and could not keep up with the host's pace. What can the berserk state do? Wouldn't this make the male lead feel that you can't control yourself and have thoughts of destroying you? This male lead. He was an honest male lead. The reason why it kept the host alive was because it felt that the host had just been born and was still pure and didn't know how to harm others. Therefore, the host's attack power was too terrifying. Honest Monk was probably going to kill the demon. Wei Wei Bai's expression was calm as she stared into the darkness. Suddenly, she whispered to the system, "The monk won't kill me. He has ulterior motives." The system said, "What do they want from you? It's a good thing. Didn't she do so much to enlighten the monk?" Bai Weiwei slowly shook her head. "This is a wooden lump. What he yearns for is a kind of extremely cold heavenly law. Everything is illusory, the flesh sac is insignificant. Even desire, attachment, feelings, and the difference between men and women are insignificant." The system said, "If that's what he yearns for, what does he want from you?" Appearance was no longer important. He couldn't be greedy for the host's beauty. The is at https://m/sashu.com// the below to record this reading record. Chapter 2956. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. "I don't know what he wants from me. Anyway, he had a vague intention from the beginning. It seems that he wants to get something from me to evolve himself. That's why I dared to court death. I was also sure that he wouldn't kick me away. Ning Chen was a person like that. He wouldn't bring a demon for no reason. Then he would teach her cultivation. He wouldn't let her roll around and make a scene and not kick her away." The system flipped through the information, but it couldn't find any intention of the male lead. "Wei Wei Bai, this is a kind of intuition, but it could be wrong. Maybe the monk doesn't have any intention, but simply likes to be a demon." After saying that, she continued to look at the demon's berserk state. "Oh my god, the fangs are out. This is a pig demon. So ugly." In the end, Wei Wei Bai finally deducted some life points and bought some inferior demon's berserk potion. The supermarket really went all out for performance, and this thing was really sold. It was just that the duration was very short. And it wouldn't make the host's brain irrational. Appearance and berserk aura could be imitated. Only the state was still played by the host. Ning Chen's chanting speed increased a little, and he soon found that his mind was unstable. He suppressed his fluctuating emotions. Just as he was about to take another scripture, he found that an unstable aura appeared from the bowl. It seemed like something was pulling the air, making it difficult to breathe. He stared at the bowl with lowered eyes. The bowl had power, the power of protection. Once she entered this place, no demon could invade her. But there was something wrong with her aura. It wasn't possessed, nor was it controlled by external objects. Demon's berserk state? Ning Chen's expression changed slightly, and he immediately reached out to open the bowl. Sure enough, he saw that Wei Wei Bai's eyes were red, and there were demon lines at the corners of her eyes. There were a few red lines on her beautiful face, and the demon's sharp teeth were exposed on both sides of her thin lips. Even her face and ears were a little longer. This was the appearance of a berserk demon. She narrowed her eyes, seemingly without any rationality, and looked back at Ning Chen coldly. It was indeed the berserk state. Ning Chen frowned for a moment, and suddenly reached out to grab her. Fairies would attack indiscriminately at times like this. Moreover, they would crave for human flesh. There was no sense of reason. It was at this time that many fairies attacked humans and experienced the benefits of eating humans, which was why they continued to degenerate. Ning Chen didn't use his Buddhist light. Instead, he used his fingertip to lift her up. However, Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out, grabbed his finger, and bit it hard. It was different from the previous biting for fun. This bite tore through the skin, and the sharp teeth pierced into the skin, causing blood to gush out. Bright red beads of blood appeared on his white fingertips. She seemed to have detected the smell of blood. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she stuck out the tip of her tongue and licked it. Ning Chen immediately retracted his finger, but found that it was too late. His blood contained the power of the Buddha light. Sure enough, after she drank the blood, her entire body immediately grew bigger, and even her lotus dress turned completely red. She was wearing a bright red dress, and her slender ankles were so fair that she was excessively beautiful. The beautiful seductress sat on the table. Her eyes had long lost their clarity and were instead filled with a seductive red. She stuck out her tongue and lightly licked her moist lips.
He seemed to be tasting something.
Then, she widened her eyes slightly, and her lips curled up, revealing a nasty and greedy smile. This kind of her lacked her usual delicate purity. There was only a soul-stirring seductress, a wanton beauty, and a temptation that made people have no way to retreat. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.